All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Melanie Israel, a research associate here in the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for joining us here today for Women Speak 2019, and especially thank you to Americans United for Life for putting together today's symposium. Just a brief housekeeping note, if everybody could go ahead and take out your cell phone, put it on silent so that we're able to hear from all of our wonderful speakers uninterrupted. Today we're hearing from a very impressive group of women, experts in law, media, culture, academia. All of them are endeavoring to advance the cause of life. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of today's speakers, and I can attest to the fact that AUL has brought together a truly all-star panel. Since the 1973 Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton decisions created a right to abortion on demand, the pro-life movement has worked tirelessly to reorient the hearts and minds of an entire generation toward the dignity and worth of every person, born and unborn. In the last year alone, we've seen a number of victories, from pro-life legislation at the state level, federal administrative action, a realignment in courts across the country. There's been a lot of progress. We're in the middle of a much-needed national conversation about consensus issues like late-term abortion and born-alive infants. It's a very welcome conversation. And clearly, not just in the last year, but in the last 4 decades, we've seen a great deal of pro-life victories. But the challenges to pro-life efforts that inevitably stem from sanctioned abortion on demand persist. Radical pro-abortion forces are well-funded and well-organized. They have powerful allies, from elected officials to big business, big tech, the mainstream media, Hollywood, the list goes on and on. States like New York have advanced radical and dangerous legislation to allow for abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. Just last week, the Kansas State Supreme Court discovered that for over 100 years, the right to abortion has existed undiscovered until now in their state constitution. But what if such a right was a right no more? What if America's current abortion regime and the jurisprudence that's gotten us to where we are today were relegated to the ash heap of history tomorrow? What if women across the country can flourish in a society without abortion? Today, we're going to hear from women who can explain how we can do just that. And now I'm going to turn things over to the Heritage Foundation's Vice President of the Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity, Charmaine Yost.
Thank you, Melanie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here bright and early on a Wednesday morning. So I'm kind of a late addition to the lineup here, and I know that I'm standing between you and a really, really remarkable lineup of some of my favorite women in the public policy arena. So I'm not going to talk very long, but I asked if I could say just a few words here at the beginning to welcome you and to introduce our first speaker, because it was really my privilege to be a part of Americans United for Life for nearly a decade, going back a few years now. And so looking out across this audience, I'm seeing some very special people and some very dear friends. And I particularly love this event. I love the idea of Women Speak. And I wanted to mention why I see this as being so important as we get started on this day. And I see my old and dear friend, Clark Forsyth here. And Clark was the one who really taught me the depth of how important something called the reliance interest is. And we stand here today still enduring the regime of abortion on demand because of the reliance interest, because the Supreme Court believes that American women have come to rely on abortion for our place in society. And as I looked at the really, really terrific number of women coming today to speak out about this, it really underscores the fact of what a travesty that kind of a concept is, the idea that we have to have abortion for our place in society. One of the things that I researched while I was at AUL was the intellectual history of the pushback against the reliance interest, of advancing the argument of how important it is to look at how abortion harms women. And of course, with any idea that advances in the public policy arena, all the good ones always have a lot of different people who are involved. But it's important to note that Americans United for Life, going all the way back into the 70s, has been at the front line of making the argument that not only does abortion destroy the life of the unborn child, but it also is fundamentally damaging to the woman. And I want to underscore, as you start this day of hearing from women and thinking about women, that is the fundamental point that we have to be advancing in the conversation today about abortion, that there are two victims, that there are two people who are involved fundamentally in that choice. And as the ripple effect from that decision goes out, there's even more in terms of the father of the baby, family, and all of the people that are involved when with the significance of the loss of that life. So with that as a context for your conversation today, and thank you, AUL, for advancing this and putting this terrific event together, I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to introduce my successor at Americans United for Life, Catherine Glenn Foster, who is now the president and CEO of Americans United for Life. Catherine has a long track record in the pro-life movement. She served for almost a decade as well at Alliance Defending Freedom as a litigation counsel, and in that position developed a very deep expertise and was seen in front of Congress and in front of legislatures across the country arguing for life. One thing she and I were talking about just a few minutes ago, she also has a depth of experience looking at end-of-life issues, which I think is critically important as we look at the life issue today. I think that issue doesn't get as much attention as it needs in terms of as we're looking at the advance of healthcare reforms that actually undermine the life issue. So we're very fortunate to have Catherine with us today, and please come and join us and lead the day ahead, Catherine.
Melanie, Charmaine, thank you both so very much for your very kind introductory remarks. Thank you for your leadership in this space, and a very special thanks to Charmaine especially, a past president of AUL, as she mentioned, and with her expertise in this area, just so appreciate your comments, especially on how abortion harms both mothers and children. You were absolutely right, and that's something that I have personal knowledge about, just knowing how I myself was harmed in my experience. We extend our warmest congratulations to you on your new role here at the Heritage Foundation, standing up for families, for women, for religious liberty, and so congratulations to you in that role. Good morning to you all, both everyone here in this room and live streaming from around the world. It is such a pleasure to join all of you here today as we kick off a discussion, continuing the discussion that we began last year with this, our second Women Speak Symposium. We are here to explore that prevailing cultural paradigm that women need abortion to succeed in society, that abortion is somehow necessary for us to succeed. Yes, our own Supreme Court has declared in its 1992 Casey decision, for 2 decades of economic and social developments, people have organized intimate relationships and made choices in reliance on the availability of abortion. The ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives. And the court went on, while the effect of reliance on Roe cannot be exactly measured, neither can the certain cost of overturning Roe for people who have ordered their thinking and living around that case be dismissed. Translation: women aren't enough, according to the court. The court seems to think that if women want to participate in civil society, we rely on abortion on demand nationwide. We have to change ourselves. The Supreme Court needs to wake up. It is not women who need to change, but a nation that would discriminate against pregnant and parenting women. And change it has. We are seeing such tremendous progress in supporting women, working women, women of color, women living in poverty, women all across our great land through improving healthcare outcomes, with pregnancy discrimination protections, with parental leave. We should also look at the language of what the Supreme Court wrote there. They wrote that people have organized intimate relationships and made choices in reliance on the availability of abortion, that people have ordered their thinking and living around Roe. Tellingly, they did not write women. Maybe they were referencing the fact that fully 3/4 of women who seek abortion have experienced some form of coercion. Did they know that far from being a rational decision between a woman and her doctor, that abortion decisions are so often a last resort turned to in the dead of night, when women don't know where else to turn, when women are facing pressure from an angry partner, when women don't know about the care offered by the vast network of more than 2,500 pro-life pregnancy centers nationwide, outnumbering abortion facilities 5-1 and offering a broad range of support? Women don't always know about all the support they can access if they choose life, all the people who will come alongside them and affirm them. And all too often, they are facing physical abuse, emotional abuse, economic duress. Women are in real fear that our partner will kick us out, will leave us, won't love us enough to love our child. There's so much work to be done to build the bridges to every single woman who finds herself alone and hopeless, to build the relationships that heal hearts and save lives, to lift these beautiful women up and say, you are enough, you can do this, and you are not alone. Roe is long past its expiration date. The false idea that women need abortion to succeed is long past its expiration date, and the American public knows it. You may have heard about the New York Reproductive Health Act, signed into law this year on the anniversary of Roe, enacting a regime of radical abortion on demand, even beyond what Roe had envisioned. You may have seen One World Trade Center lit up pink in a perverse celebration of that law. You may have heard about the reprehensible comments from Virginia Governor Northam, just a few miles south of here, when he said live on the radio, if a mother is in labor, the infant would be delivered, the infant would be kept comfortable, the infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and mother. We are talking about a cold-hearted debate over whether to provide basic standard health care to a newborn who is lying on potentially a cold, hard tray. But I guess once you've decided that it's okay to disenfranchise 13% of the population by wearing blackface and offend 100% of us, why not babies too? But I don't think abortion activist politicians know the heart of the American people. They don't know what kind of reaction they would see. Because the Marist poll in February showed that in just 1 month, there was a sudden and dramatic shift in the percentage of Americans who call themselves pro-life. It went up, shot up 9% in just 1 month. The Americans United for Life team likewise teamed up with YouGov to conduct our own poll. We wanted to know what pro-choice Americans, self-described pro-choice Americans, thought about that Reproductive Health Act. And we found that fully 2/3 of self-described pro-choice Americans oppose late-term abortions, oppose birthday abortions, oppose infanticide. It's a no-brainer. New York's radical policy exposed the truth about abortion in America, exposed the end game of these radical abortion laws, exposed the gross overreach of lawmakers who are listening to their lobbyist friends instead of their constituents. They've gone too far. 44 sitting U.S. senators went too far when they voted against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. That should have been a unanimous vote. Shameful. And just last week, as we've already heard, the Supreme Court of Kansas went too far when they enshrined Roe in their state constitution. Unrestrained judicial activism. From the lone, biting dissent. Reading today's majority opinion is a follow the white rabbit experience. One is left feeling like Alice, invited by the Queen to believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Indeed, the story told by the majority is a strange one. In it, all the luminaries of the Western legal tradition, from Sir Edward Coke and William Blackstone to Edmund Burke and Thomas Jefferson, would celebrate and enshrine a right to nearly unfettered abortion access. In this imagined world, he wrote, the Liberty Bell rings every time a baby in utero loses her arm. Powerful words, but that decision, the New York bill, are aberrations in an otherwise momentous year of gains for life. Just since our last Women Speak Symposium, Justice Kennedy retired, Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the free speech rights of pro-life pregnancy centers and said that California could not force them to advertise for abortion. And right now they are considering even more cases that get to the very heart of this issue. We have an administration that is standing up to pro-abortion forces to protect life both here at home and on the international stage. And most importantly, thousands and thousands of lives have been saved because of all the good work of all the good people here in this room and throughout our nation. But to get to an America without Roe, we have to refute the reliance interest, that doctrine imposed on us by the Supreme Court, concocted by the court that says that women rely on abortion to succeed. And we have to demonstrate that women's advancement does not depend on abortion. That's why we're here today. It is now my honor to introduce Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler of the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Hartzler proudly represents the good people of Missouri's 4th Congressional District, which is comprised of 24 counties in west central Missouri. Representative Hartzler grew up on a farm in Cass County, learning the value of hard work, family values, and a reliance on God. These values have guided her life as she attended and graduated from Archie High School, the University of Missouri, and the University of Central Missouri. They inspired her as she taught public school for 11 years in Lebanon and Belton, and as she joined her husband in a small business. Representative Hartzler began her public service in 1994 when she successfully ran for state representative in the Missouri General Assembly, where she served for 6 years. She was elected to Congress in 2010 and serves on the House Armed Services and Agriculture Committees. She currently serves as ranking member of the Tactical Air and Land Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee and is the chairwoman of the House Values Action Team. Representative Hartzler, her husband Lowell, and their daughter Tiffany reside on a working farm near Harrisonville in Cass County. Representative.
Oh, thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you for those wonderful, stirring remarks. That was fabulous, and we're really glad that you're at the helm of AUL, and it was good to see my friend Charmaine. She's moved wherever she is. Anyway, her remarks as well, and thank you, Melanie, and it's so good to spend some time with you all, and what an important topic. It's a visionary topic, but it's a hopeful topic of what life is going to be like after Roe versus Wade, and I do believe that day is coming, and it's going to be a good day. It's going to be a great day when every child has an opportunity to fulfill its God-given purpose in life, and what a wonderful thing that will be for our entire world, for our nation. And as I look and was thinking about what that will mean for us, I thought of 3 words, and I thought I wanted to share that a little bit. I think it'll be centered around help and hope and home. And so I wanted to park on each one of those just a little bit. I think the reality is that it'll be a time of more opportunity for us to partner with women and provide them with help, practical help that has been referenced earlier by Catherine. And that's where our pregnancy care centers, I think, will just have an even more expanded role in that. And so many people already do not know about this opportunity, which still just surprises me. And we have 5-to-1 outnumbering the amount of abortion clinics, as Catherine said, 2,750 centers currently, pregnancy care centers, and that involves 67,400 volunteers right now giving their time to help women. In 2017 alone, these pregnancy care centers provided nearly 2 million people, and primarily women and youth, with free services. And this is an estimated community cost savings of at least $161 million annually that this is saving. So people don't know that women, youth, and men receive services including pregnancy tests, life-affirming options consultation, sexual risk avoidance education, parenting, prenatal education, ultrasound and medical services, community referrals, and material support. But I've helped and supported our local pregnancy center for a long time, was there when they stood up, and continue to stand with them. And in my district, try to visit every one of them that I can. And each time I'm so inspired because this is not something people have to do. The people who work there, it's because they want to do or they feel called to do it. Each one feels such a passion. And then when you hear those individual stories of the women who walk through the doors, or sometimes the couples or the men, and how to build those relationships with them and help encourage them and come alongside them, and then be able to help support them in their decision to bring life to that child. But not just at that point does the help stop, but there are clothes closets and there are classes afterwards to help them get further their education. It goes on. And this is where you come alongside, hand in hand, and help somebody have a new life and give life. And with this, when Roe versus Wade is overturned, there'll be a lot more women who need that help. But it'll be an opportunity for us to come alongside and not only change the trajectory of that baby, but change the trajectory of that woman and her life. So it's an exciting opportunity that we will have. Along with that, just practically on the help side, I think we still need to continue to remember we need, and there's a place for sexual risk avoidance education. When I taught home economics, we taught sex ed, but I taught sexual risk avoidance. And it was an amazing experience to work with the teenagers and to have the pre-test ahead of time, the survey, and then afterward, and some of the positive stories that came of that and some of the decisions that were made to empower young people with how to make healthy choices. And so we need to continue to do that as well. So there's the practical side of help that we'll need to all roll up our sleeves and get involved and get to know women and help support them. But then there's the hope side. And I just enjoy even thinking about this, and I know we all do. Think of the potential of 1.3 million more children every year getting the chance to live. That's a lot of people. I mean, I represent 750,000 people in my district, which is 24 counties in Missouri. It would be equal to twice the population of my district. That more is going to have a chance to live. So who are these people? Who are they going to be? They could be the scientist that finds the cure for Alzheimer's. Will be out there. It could be the person finding the cure for cancer or diabetes or arthritis or any of these health issues that are out there. It could be the future soldiers we need defending our country, our first responders. There'll be more pastors. There'll be more businessmen and women, nurses, doctors. You fill in the blank. 1.3 more people that are going to be here. And I was talking with my daughter, who's a sophomore in college this weekend, about this time today we were going to spend together. Oh, not yet. Not yet. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Shh, you didn't see that. That's like the grand finale of the speech, okay? Thank you. So anyway, as my daughter and I were talking, she said some of her college friends and her were talking about this, and they said, well, yes, there'll be the people with science, but what about just the friends? That many more friends that we'll have the opportunity to have. And because right now, what friends are we missing? That we could be here in the dorm hanging out with, that we could go have pizza with, that we could laugh and stay up late watching crazy Disney movies together. Just friends, relationships, neighbors. So it's a time of hope. It's a time that we can all work towards and pray for. And on the economy, I think of that as somebody who votes for our budget and trying to balance the budget. Right now, we have 7.9 million jobs that are unfilled in our country.
it's kind of a nice problem to have because our economy is exploding due to the tax cuts and other good measures that we've passed by President Trump. But anyway, sorry, that was a little ad, but it's true. Our economy is exploding. We can't find enough people to fill those. And it's going to have a huge impact if you have 1.3 million people just per year available to work. I don't know if you heard the report last week, but our Social Security system is in trouble, as is Medicare. Trustees announced that in 2035, we will run out of money to be able to pay full benefits, so have to cut back on benefits. Now, I don't know if you've talked to any senior citizen lately, but that is absolutely devastating, and it's terrifying for them. They depend on that. They've paid into the system, and the problem partially is due to the lack of workers going in. We have 10,000 people a day entering Social Security because the baby boomers are going to know, hello, Debbie Lesko from Arizona. She's my friend. She's awesome. I'm good. So think about that. In 1960, the ratio of workers paying into the system versus receiving benefits was 5 to 1. So you had 5 workers for every senior citizen. Now it's less than 3. It's 2.9 workers for every senior citizen paying out. And that's why in the year 2010, for the first time, there started to be more money going out than coming in. And so we've kind of been in a deficit mode. They've had this reserve, but that is going to run out in 2035, so they can't continue that. So that's problematic. They also announced that Medicare, Part A, which is the hospital fund, is going to run out of money in 2026. So that's just 7 years. So think about it. Since Roe versus Wade, 61 million Americans are not here because they've been aborted. The first one who was aborted would now be 46 years old. The prime working years, working life. And they'd be paying in to this system. So if every baby had been allowed to live, we wouldn't be having this crisis with Social Security and Medicare. Life after Roe will enable this trend to start reversing. The programs our seniors rely on, have paid into for so many years, will have more funding. Our economy will have workers to fill the unfilled jobs. Our tax revenues will increase so we can fund needed government programs without borrowing from China, without going in debt. Wouldn't that be great? Maybe we could even start paying off some of our national debt. So those are some positive things to look forward. There are many reasons to hope life after Roe, what it will mean to us. And the last thing I wanted to share is I think it'll make a difference regarding home. I hope that adoption will become the more favored option again. Prior to Roe versus Wade, adoption was the favored option. There was more women who chose to make a parenting plan for their child and to choose adoption. Today, that is very, very, very small, very difficult because it's a lot easier just to abort your baby than it is to go through the adoption process. It's not an easy option, but there aren't any easy options when it comes to an unplanned pregnancy. But it is a viable option, and society needs to embrace it, and the media needs to promote it and to make sure people know that. Today, there are 1 to 2 million couples who are waiting to adopt. And every year, like I said, we have 1.3 million babies that are aborted. Now think about that. There's 1 to 2 million American couples right now would love to adopt, and there's 1.3 million babies that will be aborted this year. It's just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And I wanted to share a little bit now about how I've experienced this personally. And I was going to bring a box of Kleenex to put up here, just in case but anyway, it's going to be good. It's all good. It's all good. But I wanted to share, because my husband and I are one of very similar, 1 out of 10 couples in America now is probably in our category. And people don't often talk about it, either where they can't get pregnant or they have trouble getting pregnant. So think about that, 1 out of every 10 couples, but it's not something that people talk about because it's so personal and so painful, really. After 4 years of marriage, we got the news that changed our world, that we would never be able to have children. Our world came to a stop. Our dreams were shattered. A long, deep grieving process ensued, making baby showers too painful to attend. And Mother's and Father's Day, a day to dread. And it's, oh, I got 3 minutes. Okay, good. Then I'll speed through it. It's a silent grieving process, unlike the loss of a death of a child. Most people don't know, and you feel alone. The pain is experienced, like I said, by 1 in 10 couples. You're not alone. I would encourage couples or anybody listening. There's a group called Resolve that provides support. But reach out because you're not alone. To couples going through this death of a dream, abortion is especially painful. Those who are denied the ability to have children appreciate and value the miracle of pregnancy more than anyone. They don't take it for granted, but understand it for what it is, which is a true miracle. It's a privilege and a blessing to get to be part of God's work of creating a human being. It's just amazing. It still blows my mind how you have a man, you have a woman, there's no baby, and then all of a sudden, there's a baby human. It's just, think about it. It's just a miracle what God does. Yet for some in the midst of an unplanned pregnancy, they can't see it as a miracle. All they can see is their immediate circumstances. As Catherine outlined many times, of course, they're just panicking. They're not ready to parent. They believe abortion is the only option. But the reality, like I said, is there are millions of couples who would love to parent the child that God has enabled them to bring into the world. So adoption is the win-win option that allows a child to live, a birth parent to bring life into the world, and a couple to become a mom and a dad. Instead of ending a beating heart, adoption gives a home for that heart to live, flourish, and experience the love of a mom and dad who want that child more than anything. Thankfully, here's the good part, I've experienced that too. 12 years after we got the shattering news that we could never be able to have a baby, and 8 years after trying to adopt and having given up, we got a phone call that changed our lives. It was the long-lost adoption agency saying a birth mother had chosen us. We had a baby girl, and could we be there in 1 hour? I became a mom in 1 hour. And we had gone through 3 different agencies, thousands of dollars, 3 homestays, being told the chances to adopt were slim to none because most birth mothers were no longer, they don't exist, and they weren't choosing adoption. But because of a courageous birth mother, there's the cue. Okay. I was given the blessing of being a mom to a little girl who is now an amazing young woman. Move the next one. So growing up. She's been my little parade buddy ever since. Yes, go on. Next. Next. This was us at Easter. We made bunny rolls. And next. That's us. She's my best girlfriend, beautiful inside and out. Where's that Kleenex? Funny, talented, smart, loves God and others, and it's a blessing to everyone she meets. And I will always be grateful to God. I'm okay. And to a birth mother who chose to give life to her child. Chose me as her mom. My prayer and my hope is that more moms, more babies will have that same chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for sharing your story, your journey. It is so heartfelt and so beautiful. And I loved seeing all the photos of your precious daughter and your family. Thank you. It's so obvious why you're pro-life. And just knowing that there are so many people all around the country who are like you, and that you're representing all of those women, all those families so beautifully and so ably in our Congress. Thank you. It means so much. And you're right, the days without Roe and the days of help and of hope and of home, they are coming. So thank you so much for that and for all your words. It is now my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Debbie Lesko of the U.S. House of Representatives. Congresswoman Lesko represents Arizona's 8th Congressional District. In May 2018, she was sworn into the U.S. House of Representatives after winning a special election and was recently re-elected for a full 2-year term. For the 116th Congress, Congresswoman Lesko serves on the House Judiciary, House Rules, and House Homeland Security Committees, and also serves as the co-chair of the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues. Prior to her role in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congresswoman Lesko served in the Arizona legislature for 9 years, the last 3 of which were in the Arizona Senate. She served as Senate President pro tempore and chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, was honored by numerous organizations during her time at the Arizona legislature, including Champion of the Taxpayer, Guardian of Small Business, and Senator of the Year. Congresswoman Lesko received her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin. She lives in Peoria with her husband, Joe, and they have 3 children. Congresswoman.
Well, good morning. I hope all of you are doing well, and it's great to see so many women here that are champions for life. Well, as was said, I serve on 3 committees. I serve on Kevin McCarthy, who's the top Republican, asked me to serve on the Rules Committee. There's 4 Republicans versus 9 Democrats, and I'm the only Republican woman. And I also was recruited to serve on the Judiciary Committee. There's 2 Republican women on that. One of the women, Martha Roby, who's also pro-life, usually is an Appropriations Committee hearing, so I'm often the only Republican woman there. And then I asked to stay and work on the Homeland Security Committee. And so let me just very quickly tell you, I'm very pro-life. I've introduced legislation to ban dismemberment abortions. Of course, we have Democrat majority in the House now, so the bill is going absolutely nowhere. But, you know, we have to continue to fight. I really believe we are in a battle. We have been in a battle. I think there's a lot of good movement. I think a lot of young people are becoming more pro-life than they used to be. But this is the battle. Don't think anything else, and we have to stand up for what we believe in and fight. And let me tell you the reason why. So yesterday, I'm on the Rules Committee, and one of the hearing was about Medicare for All. Well, Medicare for All is not only a government takeover of our healthcare system, but it would allow funding, taxpayer funding for abortions. So, you know, obviously we have to fight that. And the other bill that I'm going to go to in 10 minutes in Judiciary Committee is the Equality Act. Now, the Equality Act sounds really great, right? Everyone should have equal rights. The problem is that in this act, they're giving some people, meaning transgenders, more protections, more rights over women. And that's why I oppose it. That's why I oppose the Violence Against Women Act in Judiciary Committee, even though I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm on the advisory council for a domestic violence shelter, and I'm the co-chairwoman of the working group to end domestic violence in Congress. I voted against the Democrats' version of the Violence Against Women Act, which funds domestic violence shelters, because there's several reasons, but one of the major reasons is it gives protection to transgenders over women. So, for instance, it forces domestic violence shelters to take in biological males that probably and may have their male body parts still, and it forces them to be in the same vicinity, maybe sleeping next to them, in a woman's facility and in women's showers. The Equality Act today takes it a step further and says that all biological males that may still have their male body parts will have to, if any schools, anything gets federal funding, that those facilities will be forced to take in biological males that identify as women and put them in, let's say, girls' sports, let's say in girls' bathrooms, girls' showers, and the thing goes on. And so to me, that is giving one set of people protections that are guaranteed by federal law over another set of people, mainly women. And so that's why I oppose it. That's why I'll be opposing it today in committee. We're having a markup of the bill. I'll be offering some amendments in that. But, you know, the thing is if we didn't have a Republican Senate and a Republican president, all of these bills would become law. And that's why elections are so very important. And in addition to what you're doing today in getting educated, I believe it's very important that you get involved in people's elections, work on their campaigns, help people that are pro-life, help people that agree with your values, because we are under attack in this country. We are under attack spiritually, we're under attack culturally, and if we allow the Democrats to take over not only the House of Representatives, but the Senate and the presidency, it's all over. I mean, I shouldn't say it's all over, but it will be a major change for our country. And so keep up the fight. That's my suggestion to you. Thank you.
Understood. Okay. Thank you, Congresswoman, for your remarks. Really appreciate it. If we could have our law panel guests join us at this point. I think we have a couple of minutes to get people on stage. So you may talk amongst yourselves for about 120 seconds. We are now going to begin the first of three panel discussions, first focusing on the legal aspects of a world without Roe. Very much looking forward to hearing the comments from both of our guests here today. First, Teresa Collette is a professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, where she serves as director of the school's Pro-Life Center. And then Helen Alvaré is professor of law at Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University, where she teaches family law, law and religion, and property law. Thank you both very, very much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing both of your comments, and if you'd like to go ahead and start.
Thank you. Where is the timekeeper so that I can?
Right back
Excellent.
there. Yes.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and I think this is an important conference, and I'm particularly delighted to be with such an all-star panel of amazing women that have done amazing things. So let me begin to answer the title that of the talk that was given to me is What Do Women Want? And it was based on a speech that I presented at least 8 times to various law schools, at least 4 of which had active protests. Apparently, some law students don't want to know what women want, at least in the context of abortion. So let me begin with sort of trying to answer that. If we think about women's equality, as it's often discussed in the political realm, it really is the claim that women have equal dignity and should have equal opportunities. It's not a claim for equal results. That's one of the things that Scandinavian countries are struggling with. The simple fact is, there are not as many men who want to be kindergarten teachers as there are women. There aren't as many women who want to be construction workers as there are men. Individual desires are an important part of how we find satisfaction in our lives. And so the first thing I would say that women want, just like men, is the opportunity to engage in meaningful work through the use of our gifts and talents. Now that work can be inside the home, and for many women it is inside the home. But it can also be outside the home. We can find satisfaction in creating beautiful things as carpenters or as woodworkers. We can find the intrigue and excitement of working in international relations. We can find the gift of healing others as doctors or nurses or physical therapists. So the simple fact is that all human beings have a calling to use their gifts and talents for the community. The second thing the majority of women want in the United States, and I would hazard a guess, although I've not done all the empirical research throughout the world, is a permanent loving relationship with a partner. In fact, according to the Pew survey, a survey that's been done for at least 3 occasions, 2010, 2014, and 2017, a majority of never married adult women want marriage. Now, I choose to use the word relationship because the numbers climb even higher when the surveys include other sorts of less formal relationships, but we want them to be permanent and loving. Among adults who've never married, 58% say they would like to do so, and 27% are at least equivocal on it. Only 14% say that they do not want to be married among American women, and the number isn't much different from men, according to the Pew Research Survey. And then finally, the third component of what we see as a full life, a flourishing life, is children, eventually. Now again, not every woman wants children, not every man wants children, but the simple fact is surveys reveal that a majority of American women want children. And according to that great pro-life source, the New York Times, last Valentine's Day, research shows that American women at the end of their reproductive lives actually have one less child than they would like. The average desired family size, according to surveys for American women, is to have 2.7 children. Interestingly, those same surveys show that men don't differ much from that. Only 0.03 less children. And in fact, we only have 1.8 children, not even replacement rate. So what are the 3 things that women want? And frankly, men as well. Meaningful work. A lifelong companion who cares and respects for us and that we care and respect. And finally, children. So the question becomes then, given that, what is it that we can do to achieve that? And can we have it all? We know, at least according to the surveys that have been provided again by Pew Research Center, that a majority of women who have small children at home would prefer part-time work. Now, it's only a small majority, but it increases based on their economic stability. So it's not surprising that women who are having difficulty making ends meet feel like the capacity to provide economic stability for their family outweighs the opportunity to stay with their children. But a majority of women say that they would like part-time work. Of that, another 9% say that they would prefer not to work outside the home at all. The ideal situation is not the situation that the American economy currently affords. In fact, what we're seeing is increasingly, for both men and women, the ideal employee, if you will, is sterile. They have no responsibilities outside the workplace. They're considered distractions. You need to go to your child's school conference? Well, that doesn't profit the bottom line. Well, maybe it doesn't profit the company's bottom line, but it certainly profits our community as a whole. This vision of homo economous underlies the very part of the plurality opinion in Planned Parenthood versus Casey that Catherine quoted at the very beginning. And I've got to say, I remember first reading this excerpt, first reading the opinion itself, and when I got to the sentence, the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives, something that had been defined as abortion when contraception fails in the preceding sentence. It infuriated me. The Supreme Court, through this plurality opinion, accepted a bargain that I don't think the vast majority of women would accept. In order to participate fully in both the public square and the marketplace, we have to put our children on the altar. We have to be willing to sacrifice our children in order to be accepted as equals. I'm sorry, that's not my definition of equality. I shouldn't have to become a little man. I shouldn't have to have the reproductive life of a man to succeed. Success and equality means that I am accepted for who I am and am able to contribute my gifts and talents without my capacity to bear children being considered a barrier. It's outrageous. And it simply doesn't reflect what women want or what they need. But by licensing abortion, not only licensing, but giving it constitutional status, the court bought into a number of lies, and they retarded women's progress toward true equality. Let me begin with the two underlying presuppositions. Number one, that women's progress toward equality did not exist prior to 1973. This is just historically false. From 1925 until 1967, we saw the government's first governor, the nation's first woman elected to Senate, the first female cabinet member in 1933, and in labor, no less. The first woman serving on the U.S. Court of Appeals. We saw the first woman serving on the U.S. Supreme Court, the first woman that was head of the New York Stock Exchange. The simple fact is that in 1972, the Center for the U.S. Census Bureau said women who had completed 4 years of college or more were as likely as men to be professional, technical, administrative, or managerial workers. We achieved that without Roe. So let me fast forward through the second part of my argument, which is that it has not advanced women's health. This threat that there were back alley abortions and coat hangers is simply a myth. The reason women's mortality rates related to abortion declined was not because it became legal. It was because antibiotics became widespread and because we could actually treat certain threatening conditions like preeclampsia effectively. The court bought into these lies and decided that we must have Roe as our savior. But what it has done is it has made it just a personal choice that the community has no interest in. And if it's just a personal choice, why as an employer do I have to accommodate it? Going to graduate school is a life-changing choice. Those of you in law school or who have gone to law school know it alters the way you think, it alters the way you work. It's a dramatic shift in your life. But employers don't have to hold my job while I go to law school. They don't have to promise to return me to the same position if law school doesn't go well for me. Why do we privilege pregnancy? Because it's not just a personal choice. Because children contribute to the well-being and the future of society. And women need support because they are contributing to the well-being of society in that way. Now, let me move quickly in the remaining minute that I have to talk about, well, okay, Professor, yes, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act should be strictly enforced, and that'll solve our problem. Well, I'm not sure I can give you a coherent reason for treating it as discrimination if, in fact, it's only a personal choice. But nonetheless, if we're going to claim equality for ourselves, how can we deny it to the tiniest human beings? It simply doesn't make sense to say that we are for equality for me, but not for thee. And the fact is that these are human beings, as evidenced by the en banc opinion in Planned Parenthood Browns versus Planned Parenthood in the Eighth Circuit, where Planned Parenthood attacked a statute that required abortionists to tell women abortion ends the life of a separate, unique human being. The court, in rendering its opinion that the statute was constitutional, said, quote, Planned Parenthood has presented no evidence that this is a false statement. In fact, the court went on to note that Planned Parenthood could prevail only by showing that any abortion did not end the life of a separate, unique human being, evidence that simply cannot be produced. We are on the right side of this issue. I hope we're on the right side of history, but our opponents make that argument far too often and far too easily. But if we do not prevail, women will continue to be required to be little men and never achieve full equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really enlightening. Helen.
Thank you. Thanks to AUL. And, I've been interacting with AUL since the 80s as just the people you could depend on to get the law right and to be doing it at a very high level. And I'm just so grateful that they're still here because there's a lot, but there's never enough lawyers working on this. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. With people thinking about the possible switch in the Supreme Court's majority vis-a-vis their opinion on Roe versus Wade, there's been a lot of action on the state level. And eventually, especially if Roe goes down or is even, has a lot of holes blown in it, there will be a lot of action at the federal level too. So, advocates for legal abortion have had Roe you know, they own the entire 100 yards of the field at this point. And so they really haven't had to make many or robust arguments about why it's good for women. They simply assert it, like Teresa suggested in Roe. They simply assert it. I was asked to draft some testimony against a Vermont effort to constitutionalize a right not only to abortion, but reproductive autonomy. And as I took a look at their testimony, to be very technical about it, it was lame. and then I started looking at New York's testimony in favor of legal abortion, and it was equally lame, which made me feel really good, but it also spurred me to action. So what I want to do is talk about the problems with this testimony and how we need to take it on. So I've written a long piece, I think 22 pages so far, but I'm also going to put this in the form of some talking points when I give it to AUL for anybody to use, and hopefully give it to various states and members of Congress. I'd like to do some kind of sort of model testimony that people could just steal from. So here's the 5 points of lameness. One, they just have this collection of just so stories claiming all progress for women is attributable to abortion, a la the statement in Casey. 2, they link women's suffering with being denied abortion. 3, they just make statements that abortion is basic health care. 4, they ignore arguments about negative effects. And 5, they ignore the negative effects of abortion advocacy, not just of abortion. Again, Teresa made reference to some of these, will overlap a bit. So it's impossible to do this in depth in 10 minutes, but I will have it all written out, and I probably will try and put it in a law review so that it's just available publicly and on SSRN. So with regard to the idea that abortion, is responsible for everything good that's happened in the last 46 years. Last year, you had Catherine Pokulik, my favorite economist and former intern when I was at the Bishops' Conference, who really laid this out for you, and I encourage you to read this piece in that little pink book you got today about last year's conference. It's really good. But I want to add a couple things to it. So they're claiming that abortion increased women's labor market participation, economic status, and education. What is the mechanism by which abortion did this? It's the claim that it postponed women's childbearing. And if you postpone childbearing, women will finish education, they'll get more money, their lives will get more settled, etc. This is a correlation game, and two can play at the correlation game. So let me start with their correlation game, which is that all of these things are due to abortion. Well, of course, the problem is it's much more complicated than that. And Catherine made reference to this, the Congresswoman made reference to this. In the last 46 years, we've had gains in non-discrimination respecting women in labor and education. We've had changed social norms about women's participation in education and labor. We've had the rise in the availability of service jobs traditionally done by women. And then, of course, we've had women's responding to that. It's a circle of increased interest and expertise, et cetera. But again, if you want to play the correlation game and you want to have some fun with that, since 1991, right, when abortion rates were at their recent historical peak to the present time, and think about this, in 91, you had 1.4 million abortions. And again, the Centers for Disease Control does not mandate reporting. The Lozier Institute does a good job putting things together, but these are just as comparative figures, they're worthwhile. In 1991, 1.4 million abortions, 338 for every 1,000 live births, 24 out of 1,000 women of reproductive age. Compared to today, about half that amount of abortions, whatever the original figure was, about half that amount, instead of 338, 192 for every 1,000 births, and instead of 24, 12 for every 1,000 women of reproductive age. But you know what happened during that time? While unintended pregnancies remain relatively stable, women's labor force participation went up. So I guess less abortion drives a higher labor participation rate of women. Also, since 1991, when women achieved parity with men in bachelor's degrees, since that time, women's achievement in bachelor's degrees and in graduate degrees has gone up. So abortion goes down, women's education and labor force participation goes up. Also, respecting the claimed mechanism, the factor by which women achieve more by having abortion. It turns out that that analysis is what we call endogenous. That is, it's something internal to the system, not the external effect of having the abortion or abortion's availability that has been driving this. So if you look at the women who actually are reaping the most rewards from delayed childbearing, it's women who have more intact families, so their family structure is more stable for them. Their parents, particularly their mother, has education. They then get education themselves. They then get married a little later, and then they have marital children. In other words, and by the way, they have the fewest abortions. So the other way you could put the headline is, women with fewest abortions reap greatest gains. Now, it's not having abortion that's driving it. That's an element. It's everything else in their life that set them up. So it's the very factors that make them better off are also the factors that make them have fewer abortions. Okay? Whereas you could also have the headline, if we're playing the correlation game, that says the women who have the most abortions are the women who suffer the most. They have the earliest childbearing, the most out of wedlock childbearing, the most unintended, etc. So it's a ridiculous attempt to make the case, but they're doing it. Okay? The other case they make is that women suffer more from abortion. If you look at the Vermont testimony, they rely essentially on women's turnaway studies. I may go about a minute and a half more, but I know we have extra time. I'm sorry. So delaying the turnaway studies claim that women who came to abortion clinics a couple weeks after their gestational cutoff suffered in the future. So, and that women who got the abortions did better. Okay, just listen to the problems with those studies. Number one, they relied on a total of 210 women, total. Number two, 24% of those women either had an abortion elsewhere or miscarried the baby. So in other words, they were including women who did not have childbirth, along with women who did, to measure the outcomes. Further, they never asked any of those women, and the odds that women whose lives are so chaotic that they were looking for a late abortion but came too late, they never asked those women, did you have an abortion prior to that one, or did you have an abortion after, because they measured them 5 years later. So they have no idea if these women had abortions. They're not really comparing people who had abortions and people who did not. Furthermore, they measured their sense of not well-being 1 week after they were turned away from the abortion while in the middle of the crisis. If you measured them years after, it turns out that they had about the same level of mental health as the women who got the abortions. At least that's the claim. And then the other thing is that they absolutely refused to disclose to anyone outside the Turnaway Studies program any of their questions or data, which is simply short of the scientific standard, okay? And finally, if you want to play the correlation game, and Catherine Pekulik mentioned this last year, women's happiness in that famous study, The Paradox of Women's Declining Happiness, done by Stevenson and Wolfers, the economists when they were at Penn, showed that women are less happy in the years since Roe, not more. So, I mean, and I don't think I think the sexual revolution is quite closely related, and the paper mentions that as a possibility, but I'm not laying it at that feet. I'm just simply saying the correlation game is it depends whose hands it in, and this needs to be pointed out. They also talk about abortion being basic health care. I did some testimony years ago. In fact, I think I'll attach it as an appendix to Congress when we were trying to do a conscience protection for abortion across all health care laws. And what I did was I went through about 10,000 pages of federal women's health care documents, White House Council on Women and Girls, Healthy People 2020, NIH special reports on women, everything. And you find that there is no mention that abortion is health care. None in any federal document. Turns out when you talk about women's health care and mother's health care, it's all about taking care of yourself so that the baby will be healthy. And they use the word baby like copiously. Then you go look at New York State health care papers, same deal. Vermont health care, same deal. They don't even believe abortion is related to healthcare. And as we know, and there's another fabulous paper done on this by the Lozier Institute, they haven't even researched it. They are decidedly uncurious about whether abortion advances women's health. I was a White House appointee in the early 2000s at NIH on the commission for the National Institute for, Children's Health, NICHD, National Institute for Child Health and Human Development. And it was about women and children. And I said, listen, you've got this questionnaire that follows tens of thousands of people for all this time. Could you ask one question about one of the most commonly performed surgeries? And the answer was, oh, we'll think about that. they don't want to know about the relationship between abortion and healthcare. Final point, and I'll finish in 1 minute if that's okay. They ignore post-abortion distress and all of the actually good studies on that. And they ignore the broad side effects of a changed, and I use the word marketplace, for sex and dating and marriage in a culture where sex is completely unrelated to tomorrow. When sex is related to tomorrow, when people don't forget that nature could have put children anywhere, but it put it here, making sex pretty weighty, right? Could have put it anywhere. I mean, God could have had it just the man, just the woman. We could grow them in the field. He could have delivered them to us one at a time. Distinction here is really revealing. He puts them there. At male-female, at love, at a relationship that is deeply intertwined and where the child needs the stability. You take that away, even the idea, I forget who wrote about it. It might have been Jennifer Fulwire who talked about being taught that unprotected sex makes babies. In other words, the failure of technology makes babies. Some terrible mistake makes babies versus sex makes babies. That's all I'm asking, to keep it in mind. Right? Because it adds weight, it adds tomorrow. So in conclusion, the other side is phoning it in on their testimony. Do not hesitate to point out that they're using all pro-abortion sources. You take a look at those footnotes. There's Guttmacher wall-to-wall or Planned Parenthood footnotes. They have complete disrespect for lawmakers who should actually be exposed to the facts. And I think you should say that. You don't even care. They don't care about women's health. They don't want to find out. And they have no curiosity about the relationship between abortion and women. Call them out as anti-women. Call them out. Women's health is not actually important to them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Teresa, Helen, for both of your comments. Just so valuable. We have a few minutes for Q&A. Since I'm sitting up here, I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question of each of you, if I may, and then after that, we'll turn to audience questions. If you can just, when it's time, stand where you are and ask your question, and I'll repeat it into the microphone for our live stream viewers. First, Teresa, a couple of questions on the bills that we've seen and the types of laws that have gone forward. We were talking a little bit about a debate that you were involved in the car on the way here. So if you could share both a little bit about historic abortion laws, and then also you mentioned rounds and the types of laws that you've seen Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry attacking. I'd love to hear a little bit about that and the types of good pro-life, life-affirming state laws that have been attacked in the courts by the abortion industry.
Before I answer, let me drop a footnote. When I said that women had been appointed to the Supreme Court, I meant state Supreme Courts, because I want to be absolutely clear about that. In fact, in Texas, we had an all-woman Supreme Court at one point. It was because the men had to recuse. They were involved in the litigation. But anyway, that old canard, women are more moral than, well, anyway. So now let me turn to the question you asked. So as I mentioned, this is a very shortened version of a presentation I've given at a number of law schools. And what was interesting is the commentator on my presentation actually clerked for Justice Blackmun at the year that Casey was released. And she began by saying that as good Federalists, we need to recognize that when the Constitution was drafted, abortion was not illegal throughout the country, through the colonies. And I said, that's just simply not accurate. In fact, the English law was very clear, which of course is what controlled the colonies, that post-quickening, it was a capital offense. And so then the move strategically was made, oh, well, then you'll concede that at least until quickening, the abortion was legal. And I said, no, what I'll concede is that we don't hang a man unless we can prove he committed the offense. And at that point of technology, the only way you could know for certain that a woman was pregnant, as opposed to having a tumor or having some other bodily disorder, was because she could feel the baby move within her. We didn't have ultrasound
in the late 1700s or mid 1700s. And so it was quite simple. It was an evidentiary question, and good lawyers required proof before we hung people, unlike the media. And so now let me turn to the second question. I actually had the privilege of serving as Assistant Attorney General and defending the state of Oklahoma's ultrasound law. Unsuccessfully, alas, but nonetheless. And I still find it remarkable that the abortion clinics choose to contest that when we know from their own research documents that ultrasounds are performed in over 90% of the cases simply as a medical practice. The reason they do that is because you can't tell whether or not the pregnancy is intrauterine without an ultrasound. And of course, if it's not intrauterine, it's an ectopic pregnancy, which it can cause women to die, particularly when they've been deluded into thinking that they have terminated the pregnancy by undergoing some sort of procedure. And they return home not knowing they're still pregnant, and the pregnancy grows and they die. Number one, it's necessary to place the pregnancy within the uterus. Number two, it's necessary because you want to know the gestational age, so you use the appropriate technique. You certainly don't want the ultimate abortionist disaster of a live birth. And so you need to know, right, how far along it is. So I'm just stunned when they cast themselves as advocates of women's health, as Professor Alvaré said. I'm stunned that we allow them to do that when they oppose simple things that they themselves do to avoid malpractice on the basis that women should not get this. And in fact, when I was doing a deposition in the case, one of their experts said, well, they don't do it in Africa. To which I said, and so you believe that the American standard of care should be that used in underdeveloped countries like Africa? That is the state of medicine you want practiced in this country. And it was just an absurd proposition. The other sorts of things they attack is informed consent provisions, which I find stunning that the courts even will entertain those lawsuits. It's like saying that the cigarette industry should be able to represent consumers in cases where there are concerns about cancer related to tobacco use. The courts regularly allow organizations like Planned Parenthood, Center for Reproductive Rights, or individual abortion clinics to claim that they are the defenders of women's health and they just don't want women to know certain things. How can that not be a conflict of interest? We would not allow any other industry. The nuclear power industry would not be allowed to represent those who, are concerned about the dangers of nuclear power. It's ridiculous. So I'll stop there because you have other questions, but I tend to get a little worked up over the irregularities that we find in dealing with this topic.
Completely understood. We see the abortion industry fighting these kinds of common sense laws. We see them fighting parental notification. We see them fighting mandatory reporting of statutory rape, basic protections for girls. It's appalling. And speaking of ultrasounds, I was recently testifying up in Delaware on that issue, and sadly, an ultrasound bill was voted down. It's appalling. It's the abortion industry working with lawmakers to keep women's own health records, a vital, critical part of informed consent, from us, to conceal that. So we can be, based on my own personal experience, we can be lying on a table in an abortion facility, craning our neck to try to see the ultrasound that's on the screen 3 feet away from us, and yet the abortion facility sees fit to conceal that, to keep the screen turned, even when we ask to see that ultrasound, and they will say, no, it's against our policy to allow women and girls to see our own ultrasounds, our own medical records, so that we can make the best decision for us and for our families, so that we can find out about the health risks of this abortion. It's absolutely appalling. And I would add that Wyoming recently ended a 28-year-long drought in passing pro-life laws by passing an ultrasound bill, because Wyoming said this is so critical. It is so important to informed consent. It is so important just to what's right in the healthcare profession that women deserve to see our own ultrasounds. So thank you for that. Helen, you're right. As I just mentioned, I travel around the country testifying both against and on behalf of a wide variety of bills, and some of the testimony I hear on the other side is lame. Absolutely right. We really are seeing women succeed and thrive in society despite, not because of, legalized abortion on demand. You also spoke of studies and some of the limitations that we've seen in studies. I would just ask what you think of some of the other studies and those correlations. Do we have evidence that abortion is harming women?
So I know you're having Patricia Coleman here today, yes? So you're going to
Yes.
have medical experts. My job is to take what they do and put it in the context of a legal argument, right? But we do, and these are overseas studies, right? And I think they are studies that demonstrate in a way that is up to the standards of current science, problematic effects on women. We have, things you've heard called snowball samples, selection effects. Come tell me how your abortion was, calling with particular people, tiny sample sizes, et cetera. We don't really have good studies, even though you may remember it was called for in the mid-1980s by Surgeon General Koop. Every year I was on the NIH panel, I just said, can we just have one question? And you needed to follow women from before the abortion to after, because you need to show it wasn't a selection effect of women who were troubled to begin with, had the abortion, and then were also troubled, right? You needed to find out that it was a variety of women who had not previously had other kinds of physical or psychological difficulties, who after the abortion began to experience it for the first time, and maybe some qualitative studies where they talk about how this happened. In any event, we really do have very strong ways to refute the claims of the other side. And again, I think Catherine Pokulik did an excellent job with her high-powered empirical tools last year, showing that at the very least they don't have an argument. Do we have an argument how it will be counterfactually when abortion is no longer here? No, we don't know exactly. We do know that we have rational arguments that about not only the physical and psychological harm, but other arguments about the effect on society. And these may not be arguments that you can prove, right? There's lots of things. Can you prove your mother loves you? No. Do you know it? Of course you do, right? There are things that are a matter of experience and common sense, experience with people, and we can demonstrate that the cheapening of sex, its unlinking from tomorrow, from kin, family, future, children, has had a negative effect on women who would like to be married a little sooner than they are, who would like to have more children than they're having, who would also like the law, instead of having all the oxygen sucked out of the room by abortion as the only feminist policy, to have policies that would allow us to, and I don't even use the word balance, I say to put family first if we are mothers, and also to allow ourselves to give our gifts in employment. So I think we can say these things and make an excellent argument even if we can't prove empirically the counterfactual. But these are common sense arguments. They speak to a lot of women's hearts. They speak to a lot of men's hearts as well. And they need to be made. And for those of you who are good at communications, they need to be made, briefly, convincingly, phrases that are one or two sentences long. You need to turn all this long stuff that I've put out here into something brief.
Thank you so much.
Could I build on that a little bit in that I often conclude the longer presentation with the challenge, and I think it's both Helen's and my project as well as many other women's projects. What would a marketplace for labor, or what would an economy look like if we actually took seriously incorporating the gifts and talents of women and also took seriously obligations to families? What would it really look like to have an economy where, and I don't think it'd look like the Scandinavian economy. It might, but I don't think so. But what would it look like to really take seriously the fact, and there's a woman at Stanford working on this, the ideal time to start your family really is not 32. For women. For men, it's not nearly as important, but for women, it's earlier than that. What would it look like to accept women entering their first career position at 40 and assume that they could progress to the pinnacle of success? What would it look like to structure it where women's engagement in graduate school was reasonably expected at age 38 or when their kids are in high school or something? And how do we provide economic support? How do we get families to feel economically stable that women can focus on things sequentially instead of having to try to do it all or postpone family building? That's a huge project and one that's worthy of all of our talents. But for Roe, I think that would have been the project of the women's rights organization.
Fascinating. Such good questions, such good discussion. It looks like we are actually out of time for questions, but I believe our panelists will be around at the break, so please feel free to ask them any questions you have at that time. Teresa, Helen, thank you so very much for your time, and I would ask our health panelists to come on up. Okay, while we finish getting our signs replaced here, just starting our health panel discussing the impact of a world without Roe on women's health and health issues. Joining us, we have Priscilla K. Coleman, Professor of Human Development and Family Studies at Bowling Green State University and Director of the World Expert Consortium for Abortion Research and Education. And we also have Dr. Martha Shuping, who practices psychiatry in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and is adjunct faculty at Belmont Abbey College. Thank you both for joining us. Dr. Coleman.
It's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to be here. I've been studying this topic of the risks associated with abortion to women's mental health for almost 30 years now. And so when Clark asked me to speak for 10 minutes, it was a significant challenge. So I'll do my best here, but I'm happy to answer questions at the break or by email or any way I can be of help to people. So when abortion became legal in the United States in 1973, the short and long-term risks associated with the procedure were largely unknown. But in the 46 years since that time, there's been an enormous amount of research published. We have professionals working in medicine and in psychology and related disciplines. So now we know a great deal about the risks. And hundreds of studies have filled the pages of professional journals across the world. And the quality of these studies varies dramatically. Generally, the later studies published in the last 20 years are of much higher quality, but that is not always the case, as we heard a few minutes ago about the Turnaway study, and I will speak a little bit about that, and Dr. Shuping will speak extensively about it. However, there are many examples of very poor science, with politically palatable findings suggesting abortion's not risky. These studies are now currently informing practice and legal efforts to prevent and remove state-level abortion restrictions. The result is a seriously ill-informed society, largely blind to the verified health risks of abortion. The ignorance perpetuates profound human suffering, compounding the loss of innocent life. In March of 2018, I thought my life was over. The National Academies of Sciences, the NAS, released a committee report titled "The Safety and Quality of Abortion Care in the United States." This report was not the first of its kind. Similar highly biased reviews of the professional literature were published in 2008 by the American Psychological Association, and then in 2010 by the UK National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health. The impetus for the NAS review did not originate with the organization, but with the funding sources. The sponsors included the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and the Susan Thomas Buffett Foundation, among others, all with very significant financial investments in pro-abortion and population control initiatives. Notably, none of the NAS committee members had a research program that was specifically related to abortion safety, seriously questioning their relevant expertise. Moreover, many of the reviewers of the NAS were actually abortion providers, including Willie Parker, Daniel Grossman, directly involved in abortion. Others had connections to pro-abortion organizations, so there were major conflicts of interest. Topics addressed in the NAS report, it was approximately 200 pages, included abortion trends, clinical skills and training, abortion-related morbidity, both psychological and medical, physical, and mortality. The committee concluded that legal abortions in the United States are safe and effective. In arriving at this conclusion, the NAS committee provided a highly skewed synopsis of the peer-reviewed literature, profoundly minimizing risks to women. Hundreds of studies were ignored without explanation. Further, the NAS committee failed to explain standards used to select and evaluate individual studies in formulating the general conclusions. Rebuttal of this report is actively underway. I've been leading that effort. We've been working for about a year now, and we have a group of experts who are writing articles. So right now I'm just going to provide an example that highlights the biased selection of studies from their coverage of the abortion and mental health literature. So ignoring the vast majority of scientific studies published, and if we look at the whole history of investigation on this topic, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of studies. So they ignored virtually the entire literature. They focused on the Turnaway study and a couple of the literature reviews previous literature reviews that were highly biased. The Turnaway study suggested more positive psychological outcomes for women who obtained abortions compared to women who were denied wanted abortion due to the timing after the legal gestational limit. And like I said, Dr. Shipping will speak more about this study, but I just would like to highlight a few more of the egregious methodological problems associated with this study. When they were recruiting their participants, there were very high refusal to participate rates. So many women who had had abortion just didn't want to get involved in the study. And then there were very high dropout rates across that 5-year period. So their final results were only based on 18.5% of the original eligible women. You could not get a study published anywhere on any other topic with that kind of attrition. So it's a ridiculous study. Also, another big issue with this study was the use of very simplistic measures. 2 of the variables only had 6 items, and this is really inexcusable given the multitude of well-developed scales for variables like anxiety, depression, life satisfaction. And responsible scientists just don't do that. They don't extrapolate from minimalistic assessments to women's complex emotional responses. In other areas of investigation, the NAS has maintained close ties to industry, raising conflict of interest allegations, often directed at the committees of invited scientists authoring these reports. A comprehensive analysis was published in 2006 by the Center for Science in the Public Interest, a consumer advocacy organization. They concluded, unfortunately, we found serious deficiencies in the NAS's committee selection process that could jeopardize the quality of future NAS reports. The NAS has allowed numerous scientists and others with blatant conflicts of interest to sit on committees. Compounding that problem, those conflicts of interest usually are not disclosed to the public. In order to effectively avoid bias, there has been a long-standing need for the development of an assessment tool to enable evaluation of all the published studies on abortion and mental health using the same established scientific criteria. So last year, I developed and refined such a tool using 9 widely recognized scientific criteria with individual criterion scores ranging from 0 to 4 and potential total study scores from 0 to 36. Higher scores suggest a stronger methodology. In a recent study, this is all in preparation for rebutting the NAS, oh dear, 3 minutes. I compared the methodological rigor of investigations suggesting women who abort are at an increased risk for mental health problems with the studies that suggested the opposite. I had 2 raters. We evaluated systematically, applying this tool, 75 different studies. A total of 49 studies had results indicating, yes, abortion increases risk for mental health problems, whereas 26 studies provided data suggesting no, abortion does not increase risk. But not only were there twice as many studies revealing abortion increases risk compared to studies with no findings, but the most rigorous studies published to date reveal abortion does contribute to women's mental health problems. The average total score for the yes studies was 22.6. The average score for the no studies was 18.3, and this was a statistically significant difference. One of the studies that was rated highly was published by Dr. Paul Sullins. He's also helping in our rebuttal effort of the NAS, but I think I'm going to skip what I was going to say because Dr. Shuping will talk about Sullins' study, but it was one of the highly rated ones using this assessment tool. In 2011, I published a meta-analysis on abortion and mental health in the British Journal of Psychiatry. Dr. Shuping will also explain a little more about what a meta-analysis is exactly, but it is a quantitative review. I pooled the data from 22 studies, nearly 900,000 participants, and found that women who had an abortion had an 81% increased risk for mental health problems. When that comparison, I did some sub-analyses. When the comparison group was unintended pregnancy delivered, it was a 55% increased risk. There are many different possible adverse consequences to abortion that fill the pages of the literature. Just very briefly, some of the strongest outcomes that we see include sadness and depression, emotional numbness, coldness, feelings of isolation, increased alcohol and drug abuse. That's a huge one because so many women don't directly address the trauma, and it's in our society, it's obviously easy to gain access to drugs and alcohol without disclosing the source of your pain. Anxiety disorders of various forms, thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, and an inability to bond with present and future children. We've published a few studies showing that connection. And when there is large-scale deception and abuse of science by mainstream professional organizations, the potential for adverse effects on individual women is seriously magnified. Psychological pain and trauma do not discriminate based on age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or other background characteristics. So I'd like to conclude with the experiences of a woman published as part of an online series by The Atlantic. The title of that series is Personal Stories of Abortion Made Public. Her story was posted in August of 2016. The woman begins by saying, as a professional, high-earning, independent woman, the unexpected difficulty of this experience on both a personal and relational level was shocking. I wish I had known what I now know going into the experience. I would have handled it much differently and perhaps in a way that could have mitigated its destructiveness. She concludes, and this is really moving, she concludes, babies hurt me now. A month after the abortion, while I waited for my luggage at the baggage claim, 3 babies surrounded me, all under a year. 2 are very small, less than 6 months. 1 is right next to me, leaning toward me in its carrier, looking straight into my eyes. His own eyes wide, blue, and unblinking. So close he can touch me. I cannot bear it. But I stay there because I think this is my punishment. When I get home, I unpack and I cry. I think there are 2 of me now, moving forward in parallel, my current self and another me who is due to have a baby on January 23rd. She is still loved, and maybe she's happy, or maybe not, but she's not alone. After Roe falls, hopefully heart-wrenching stories like this will be less common. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. That was so powerful. And not only the studies, but that story. It rings so true to the experience of so many women who have chosen abortion and so often regretted it. Dr. Shuping.
Thank you. When I started, excuse me, when I started college in the early 1970s, prior to the Roe decision, some of my professors taught that motherhood was a barrier to women's success in life and that abortion was necessary for women's empowerment. But this teaching was not rooted in, rather, this teaching was rooted in unproven theory, not research. In the 46 years since then, research has not confirmed this theory. A meta-analysis is a type of study design in which data from many studies are combined to provide a larger sample size with greater statistical power. This gives increased ability to identify an effect when the original studies were too small to detect the effect. It is considered a useful type of study for resolving controversies when smaller studies have given conflicting results. Excuse me. In a 2013 meta-analysis, Dr. David Ferguson and colleagues addressed the question, does abortion reduce the mental health risks of unwanted or unintended pregnancy? The conclusion states, there is no available evidence to suggest that abortion has therapeutic effects in reducing the mental health risks of unwanted or unintended pregnancy. Echoing this, Dr. Paul Sullins wrote, to date, some studies have minimized the risk of distress following abortion, but not a single study has documented mental health benefits for women from the practice of induced abortion. Sullins' research in 2016 was a 13-year longitudinal study, and that is a study that involves repeated measurement of the same people over an extended period. His study attracted little media attention, but it is among the strongest and most important studies of abortion and mental health to date. The quality of the data set used is remarkable and is part of what makes this a truly important study. And I wanted to contrast a really excellent study with the Turnaway study, and you can see the difference. The National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, abbreviated ADHealth, was started in 1994 with funding from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development and 23 other U.S. government agencies and private foundations. This project created a nationally representative sample of more than 20,000 U.S. adolescents in grades 7 through 12 and has continued to follow these students into adulthood. Extensive data was obtained directly from the students and also from their parents, siblings, school administrators, and romantic partners using questionnaires, interviews, and medical tests. Existing databases giving information about the community were also included. Thus, the AdHealth database provides the largest, most comprehensive study of the health-related behaviors of U.S. adolescents during that transition into adulthood. AdHealth has become a resource for more than 30,000 researchers, 30,000, and has given rise to 7,500 publications to date. It is important to understand this is an extremely high-quality data set which can be used to shed light on many different health issues. Although AdHealth was not designed specifically for the study of abortion and mental health, it does overcome some problems that have plagued research on abortion and mental health. Enrollment in this study was school-based, with parents being told they could direct the school to keep their child out of the study, but if parents did not object, students were enrolled. Thus, there was a high initial participation rate and relatively few dropouts, with 80.5% of the available original sample completing follow-up at 7 years and at 13 years. This is in contrast to many abortion studies in which the initial participation rates are often low and dropout rates are high. And this can be problematic in research because, especially with abortion patients, because research with abortion patients as well as general samples have shown that people who are more distressed tend to decline to participate in research and have a greater tendency to drop out. If those who are the most distressed drop out, then these studies give a false measure or false assurance that there is no problem. It's also worth noting that AdHealth used very rigorous methods for assessing multiple mental health conditions repeatedly over time. For example, several dozen specific questions were asked about various types of substance abuse. A 20-item rating scale was used for depression, and multiple ratings for anxiety were used, including one 7-item scale. Most of the rating scales were consistent with DSM-4 diagnostic criteria, and that is the diagnostic manual published by the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. Sullins used the AdHealth data to study reproductive events, including live birth, abortion, involuntary pregnancy loss, that would be miscarriage, stillbirth, or ectopic pregnancy, or never pregnant. These reproductive events were studied in regard to risk of 7 mental health conditions: depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, cannabis abuse, and nicotine dependence. The data set provided complete mental health and reproductive health data for 8,005 women who had been followed over a 13-year period of time. Because the AdHealth data set had a wealth of information about each participant, it was possible to statistically control for 20 different potentially confounding factors, such as poverty, childhood abuse, intimate partner violence, and rape. Sullins' results showed that having an abortion was consistently associated with increased risk of mental health disorders. Giving birth to a live child was consistently associated with decreased risk of mental health disorders. Involuntary pregnancy losses were not consistently associated with either increased or decreased mental health problems. Sullins gives several reasons for asserting that these results provide some of the strongest evidence to date that the association of abortion with psychological distress is not simply co-occurring, but is causal. The results were consistent and strong even when accounting for potential confounders. The data set and Sullins' methods assured that the pregnancy events occurred first before the mental health conditions by up to 5 years. The mental health risks increased with repeat abortions, indicating that the distress is more likely due to the abortions and not some co-occurring or pre-existing condition. The fact that only abortion and not other reproductive events was associated with a consistent increased risk of mental health problems is also consistent with causality. Although Sullins did not specifically discuss the Bradford Hill criteria for causality, his study does meet most of these established criteria, and Sullins' results were similar to longitudinal studies by Peterson in Norway and Ferguson in New Zealand. And actually, his results, using a different methodology, using the longitudinal study, also were very similar to what Coleman had found by her meta-analysis, and also Ferguson. Another study during 2016 attracted far more widespread media attention, one based on the Turnaway study data. The Turnaway study is a longitudinal study conducted by a team of researchers at the University of California at San Francisco. This study was designed to compare the various effects of having an abortion to the effects of being denied an abortion of an unwanted pregnancy. The mothers turned away due to waiting until the pregnancy had progressed beyond gestational limits for that clinic or that state. The Turnaway study produced a data set that has been used to generate approximately 36 publications. So again, they have a data set also that can be used again and again to produce studies, but not of the quality or the utility of Sullins' data, the data that Sullins used. Patients were recruited at 30 abortion clinics in the U.S. by approaching and inviting 3,016 women. Of these, only 37.5% consented to participate, and after giving informed consent by telephone, 15% dropped out before the first interview. The study involved telephone interviews every 6 months for 5 years, with each woman being offered a $15 department store gift certificate for participation in informed consent and a $50 certificate for each interview after that for the 5 years. However, women continued to drop out over the 5 years of the study, with only 18.5% of the original 3,016 women remaining by the end of the study, When the authors make claims about the experience of the majority of women, we must remember that more than 80% of the women were not present at the end of the study, and there's evidence from several sources that those who are more distressed are less likely to participate. It's also important to note that the assessments for mental health symptoms were extremely limited in the Turnaway study. To rate women's emotions at 1 week after either having the abortion or being turned away, the authors did not use validated rating scales using symptoms from the Psychiatric Diagnostic Manual, but created 2 extremely simplistic scales measuring a total of 6 items. And in a study to determine the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder after abortion, the 4-item primary care PTSD screen was used. So only 4 items when there are much longer scales that could have been used to get better information. The authors conceded that the methods used did not allow them to pinpoint whether the PTSD symptoms discovered were due to the pregnancy, due to the abortion, or other factors. And they identified very few cases of PTSD with their methods. Many of the conclusions from the Turnaway data are opposite to other respected studies using good methodology. For example, the webpage for the Turnaway study claims that women who are denied an abortion are more likely to stay tethered to abusive partners. Yet, a 2014 meta-analysis of 74 studies by Hall and colleagues showed that intimate partner violence was associated with termination and with repeat termination. In one study, women presenting for a 3rd termination were more than 2.5 times more likely to have a history of physical or sexual violence than women presenting for their 1st termination. And the editors of the journal, in a little editorial summary, said, "The researchers' findings support the concept that violence can lead to pregnancy and to subsequent termination of pregnancy, and that there may be a repetitive cycle of abuse in pregnancy." And of course, I don't believe that ending Roe will end domestic violence, but I do think that it can help to reduce some of the violence and help to break those cycles. And I would say the next time a publication from the Turnaway study data makes it into the headlines, read carefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating. Again, I'll take the privilege of one question for each of you first. Dr. Coleman, that story you shared was so very powerful, so raw, so meaningful. In your experience, is it outside the norm? We have the broad data. We have the statistics on this. Have you heard the stories of other women similar to that who have that kind of interpersonal issues or relationship mother-child issues after abortion?
Definitely. There are many studies that have looked at the bonding and the loss, the grieving. Dr. Shuping probably can address that more specifically than I can because she's a clinician. However, I recently conducted a study, a qualitative study. We have nearly 1,000 women. We put it together a few years ago, and I actually just published a paper on it where we asked women just very simply what was the most negative thing about your abortion? What was the worst outcome of your abortion? And then we also asked what was the most positive experience associated with your abortion. And because there, as Dr. Shuping noted, there really just is not any research out there that shows benefits to women. So in fairness, we asked both questions, and it was remarkable what the data, the primary, so many women, at least a third of the women said there weren't any benefits to killing my child, and they used terms like killed, murdered, and so forth. Some of the women said the best outcome was that they experienced a conversion experience, that they couldn't find any peace except through God. So there's a lot of religious information in terms of women's quality of life increasing because of that important factor. Others spoke about being involved in the pro-life movement and helping others not to make such a destructive choice. And then in terms of the negatives, there were just so many themes. I had a couple students working with me for 6 months, coding all of this negative stuff. And we learned a lot about, beyond just the depression and the anxiety and the substance abuse, the typical experiences that we see in the more quantitatively based research, just all kinds of themes about the destruction that went beyond the woman's quality of life and mental health to impacting later born children, romantic relationships. I mean, the devastation, just reading through 1,000 women's reports of what was the worst outcome associated with their abortion really gave us a lot of new insight in terms of where to go with the quantitative research. But as I said, Martha can speak to this much better than I can.
If you'd like to go ahead with that before yeah.
Well, I think there is research that shows that the bonding to the women, when the women experience bonding before their abortion, that's the greatest predictor of mental health problems after the abortion. And I was just, before, when I was trying to prepare this talk, I was looking at an older qualitative study where a woman at the age of menopause in England, looking back at her past abortion, and she used the term, I know you said that, I try to avoid saying this, but she used the term herself, murder. She said that after she had her abortion, they had told her she would just be fine, it's okay, and she thought she would be okay. But she said afterwards she was wanting to kill herself, she was getting drunk and engaging in alcohol abuse, because she said all I could think about was that I've murdered my baby. And she said even now at the age of menopause, looking back, she says, I count the birthdays every year when I remember the expected due date. She thinks about him at holidays, at Christmas. And all the women in this small study said that. And that's exactly what I hear when I do abortion recovery programs. I think that's so important for women to know that there are places to go and programs that can help to process the grief and to actually be okay after an abortion. But it is really a struggle, and I've known many women who've carried this until even in their 60s. The oldest woman I've spoken to was in her 80s, and they think about that baby that they lost, and they do call it their baby. I think it's also interesting that the abortion clinics, I was just reading an article by Carol Jaffe, who is someone who had won a lifetime award from the National Abortion Federation, but Carol Jaffe had interviewed abortion counselors, and they said, we have this, we're told to tell women when they say it's a baby, we say, oh no, it's a clump of cells, oh no, it's a fetus, and people want to conceal that, and yet I think that's really the crux of the issue for many women.
Yes, it's so good to know that there is that availability of solace and relief through some of the programs out there, and it's so important to know that we're not alone when we're counting our child's birthdays, when we're missing them at holidays.
And could I just say about those programs, there is some little-known research showing that several different support programs for women that are commonly offered have actually produced, with before and after testing, they're showing reductions in shame, improvements in self-esteem, and reductions in trauma symptoms, and they are statistically significant. One was published actually in 2004 in a social work journal, but many people have not seen it. It was kind of just buried in the pile of literature. Another one was a dissertation that was published within the last couple of years that we hope will also be published in a journal later. So
that's fascinating, especially that discussion of shame. We were talking about testifying on bills earlier, and one of the things that I've noticed recently is that people are talking about a potential increased risk of shame, even from being allowed the right to see your own ultrasound again, and how that could shame women instead of providing us with the information we're looking for. So to be able to push back on that and find real relief from shame is beautiful. One other very quick question for you, if I might. You discussed the Turnaway study extensively. With data sets available, there's so much more extensive, so much more reliable, it seems. Why do you think researchers keep turning to this data set, and perhaps specifically when it comes to DSM diagnoses? If you could maybe briefly touch on that.
Wait, why do they?
Why do researchers continue to go to that data set for their research instead
the
of
Turnaway study? Well,
yes.
Priscilla and I have talked about this before, but I think that the funding for the Turnaway study was provided by pro-abortion funding agencies, and the women themselves in San Francisco are in a pro-choice research center where they perhaps had an agenda, and at least it fits with their worldview. They're producing research that gives them what they believe is, it suits their perspective. And sometimes when you get results that fit with what you desire, then it's natural to keep using that data set. I think they believe that they have found the perfect control group. It would be ideal theoretically, if you could, to compare the results of having they're trying to answer the question, should you abort the unwanted child or have to carry the unwanted child? But in fact, there is a lot of research showing that this wantedness and unwantedness is not a realistic condition. It's not a distinction that can be made. There are many flaws with that kind of research. And in fact, that presumes that those pregnancies are unwanted when in fact there's so much coercion and so much domestic violence, and they're not sorting that out at all. So it is ridiculous to think that women, if they come to an abortion clinic, that doesn't mean the baby was unwanted at all.
Exactly, and also the wantedness being in flux. It's not a constant throughout a pregnancy or through the life of the child.
Could I add to that? I also would like we need to recognize and acknowledge that all of the major professional organizations like the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, they've all taken very upfront stances that are totally pro-choice, unabashedly. It's in their mission statements. They're supposed to be scientific organizations, obviously professional organizations as well, but they're supposed to be evidence-based, and they are just not. They systematically ignore any study that shows adverse consequences, regardless of the methodology. I think one of the very first turnaway studies, and I've been a reviewer for several of them. I get sent. I guess they have to give a token effort to the other side. But so my comments are always ignored. I still try to do that. But one of the very first ones was published in JAMA Psychiatry, premier journal, unbelievable. It's corrupt. It really is. They have a clear agenda, and for years, we struggled to get articles published on this topic. Finally, have gotten really good studies published, and we have a wealth of data. It's really not even in debate anymore. The evidence comes down on the side of the truth that abortion is detrimental to women's mental health, to their future children, to their families. And I never say every single woman who has an abortion is going to be scarred by it, but the level of increased risk is dramatic. It's 20 to 30%. And why aren't women warned? I mean, I've been involved with several states as an expert, and we're just fighting for basic litigation that women who fall into these high-risk groups receive substantive counseling. I've been involved with the waiting period laws in different states. What is so wrong with giving a woman 24 hours to make such a heart-wrenching decision, or 48 hours? I think the longest one is 72 hours we have in South Dakota. But they're woman-centered laws, and they're they make sense. And it's like the other side is just has lost it. I mean, it's just really ridiculous. There's no reliance on science, but it's important to realize and know we have the evidence. It would be great to have a nationally representative sample funded by NIH or NSF, the National Science Foundation. It's not going to happen. It may happen, but it hasn't happened. But the number of studies worldwide, we have the evidence. It's just packaging it and using it effectively to institute laws that take care of women.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, Dr. Shuping. Thank you both so much for being here. Please join me in yes. Okay, we're now going into a short break, so stay tuned if you're joining us by web, and we'll be back in just a few moments. Thank you. ahead and get started again. Welcome back, everyone. We are here today because we recognize how important that it is for women to be able to speak on life in the public square. And we also know how very little professional reward there can be when we're talking about speaking the truth about human life to indifferent and sometimes very hostile culture forces. Meghan McCain is one woman who knows firsthand both the importance and the cost of public advocacy for life. It is now my honor to present the inaugural Defender of Life in the Media Award to Meghan McCain, co-host of The View. I have been consistently impressed by Ms. McCain's courage in the cause for life, from backing efforts to defund Planned Parenthood to supporting the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And I am thrilled to be able to present this inaugural award to Ms. McCain. We're so pleased to be able to honor Ms. McCain for consistently defending human life, not only from her place of prominence on The View, but also whenever when we see life issues burst onto the stage in public view, in the public square. We live in a social media world, and I'd like to highlight just a few of her tweets that demonstrate Ms. McCain's bold stand for life in an industry that is often inhospitable to human rights, and the human rights especially of the most vulnerable among us. First, in response to Virginia Governor Northam's comments on infanticide, she said, as a pro-life woman, I can't compromise with regimes like this. He was surprised he shouldn't be. She wrote, the need to protect babies who survive abortions should not be a partisan issue. She wrote, we are one of only 7 nations in the world, along with North Korea and China, to allow abortion on demand after 20 weeks. Our existing law is extreme, and as a pro-life American, I cannot support anyone who supports it. It is a battleground culture war issue, as we see in New York, where the Democratic standard is abortion on demand, taxpayer funded, and if you don't like it, then leave. True leaders don't play pretend about our divisions, they lead. And she wrote, I'm pro-life, and not in the talking point of not for me, but okay for other people sense. I stand by what I said this morning. If the Democratic Party wants to be the party of late-term abortion and infanticide, they won't just lose. History will judge them for what they did. Ms. McCain is a witness for the next generation of American women. She's proof that we don't need to compromise in speaking truth about human life, and we can be proud that empowering witness to what we know, medically and scientifically, about human life. It's a simple fact that almost any time abortion is brought up, abortion activists and opponents of the human right to life claim that those who want comprehensive legal protection for all human beings are trying to turn back the clock. And that is exactly the opposite of what we're doing here at Women Speak, and it is exactly the opposite of what Ms. McCain does every day from her platform to protect the most vulnerable among us, children in the womb. All Americans of goodwill need to do more to ensure women, children, and families, and our whole society can respond with love and generosity to every human life. And that is what Ms. McCain stands for. While Meghan unfortunately can't be here with us in person today, this is When the View films, she does have a special message that she wants to share with you all. We can share the video now.
Americans United for Life has fought to protect and defend human life from conception to natural death through vigorous legislative, judicial, and educational efforts, and through this work is helping to foster a more life-affirming culture. I applaud Americans United for Life for their comprehensive beginning-to-end approach, which is reducing abortions and helping state after state enact life-saving law and policy. I am honored to accept Americans United for Life's Defender of Life in the Media Award, and am proud to be a voice for vulnerable and marginalized members of our society who are at risk of violence and harm. We cannot let politics overrule what science and medicine reveals to be true about our shared humanity. Women Speak is critical precisely because it's a special opportunity to elevate women in envisioning a better American future. We need more voices in our media and in our public square, and together we can encourage our fellow Americans to embrace a friendly, more generous, and more life-affirming view towards human life. Thank you again for this great honor.
Now, Ms. McCain's wonderful husband, Ben Domenech, is here with us, and I'd like to welcome him up to accept AUL's inaugural Defender of Life in the Media Award on her behalf. Welcome, Ben.
I won't take too much time because this is, after all, women speak. But I do want to just say that I am very proud of my wife for the witness that she has on this issue, and the platform that she has today is one that she puts to, I think, great use on this subject. But think about how rare it is to hear from pro-life women in the media. Look at the landscape of columnists and representation that exists across the media landscape, and you will not find a more biased subject than the way that this issue is represented. What we know from the polling data is that overwhelmingly women are more pro-life than men. They actually care about this subject in a very passionate and personal way. It's a huge priority for them, and yet when this is represented in the public square, again and again and again, we see Planned Parenthood and the other entities out there get away with framing this as being a binary issue where women are all on one side and not on the other. And it disgusts me, and it should disgust all of us. There's a thing that I like to do occasionally, which is keep track of the various corrections that are put out on issues and stories related to abortion, where the view is so monolithic within the media. This is a story from 2017 in The Atlantic entitled "How Ultrasound Became Political," written by a woman who's both at Harvard and Yale. This is from the bottom of the article. This article originally stated there is no heart to speak of in a 6-week-old fetus. In fact, the heart has already begun to form by that point in pregnancy. The article also originally stated that an expectant mother participating in a study decided to carry her pregnancy to term even after learning the fetus was suffering from a genetic disorder, when in fact the fetus was only at high risk. The article originally stated as well that Bernard Nathanson headed the National Right to Life Committee and became a born-again Christian. Nathanson was active in, but did not head the committee and was never a born-again Christian, but rather a Roman Catholic. The article originally stated that many doctors in 1985 claimed fetuses had no reflexive responses to medical instruments at 12 weeks. This is untrue. Finally, the article originally stated that John Kasich vetoed a bill from Indiana's legislature instead of Ohio's legislature, after which the article was incorrectly amended to state that Mike Pence had vetoed the bill. We regret the errors. Now that's The Atlantic. Look, I mean, that's a respected publication, generally speaking. This is a problem, and the only way to correct it is by having voices come out from the movement who are willing to go up there and bear the kind of flack that you have to take. The threats, the disrespect, the gaslighting that comes into play every time that you speak up on this issue. It should give you all the more courage to stand up on it in every way possible. And we can't all be on shows that get 3 or 4 million viewers in a day, but we can be a part of our community in a way that advances the cause of life and refuses to back down from these people who are going to continue to lie about this issue. So thank you very much for this. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of my wife, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Now if we can have the members of the culture panel come up and join us. Welcome. Kicking off our culture panel is Dr. Rebecca Ost, the Associate Director for Research for the Center for Family and Human Rights, CFAM, in Washington, D.C. Then we will hear from Alexandra DeSanctis, a staff writer at National Review, where she covers U.S. politics and elections, abortion policy, and the pro-life movement. And then finally, Catherine Hadro, the host and producer of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, an international television show dedicated to pro-life issues from a Catholic perspective. Welcome to all of you. Dr. Ost.
Thank you so much. So I've been asked to talk about how women can flourish in the context of legal restrictions on abortion. And of course, the fact that we're even having to answer this question is a testament to how much of a narrative of fear has been given to women, that their flourishing must require abortion as just a precursor for it. So how does this happen? As someone who works on pro-life issues in the international context, I think it's informative to look at what the status of women is like in other countries and draw some helpful lessons, some hopeful, some more cautionary from these experiences. Obviously, when we talk about what it means for women to flourish or to thrive, we're talking about more than just their survival. But it's important to begin there because that remains central to the debate around abortion, both here and abroad. In the US, where health care is very good, we still, every time abortion restrictions are mentioned, out come the coat hangers. But countries that do have strong pro-life laws, many of which are in developing regions, their leaders are repeatedly told that if they want to improve women's health, to reduce maternal mortality, to achieve success in international projects like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they first need to liberalize their abortion laws. So in 2012, researchers in Chile, led by Allard Koch, issued a great rebuttal to this argument in the form of an analysis showing that Chile had managed to improve its maternal health outcomes dramatically over the course of several decades, to the point of really becoming a global leader in that area. Meanwhile, Chile not only maintained legal restrictions on abortion, but in fact strengthened them further in 1989. After that, their maternal health indicators continued to improve. So this analysis, which was helped considerably by the meticulous record keeping that Chile did, showed the result of what we would consider a massive natural experiment. During this time, investments were made in improving health systems, access to clean water, public infrastructure. But interestingly, the most impressive correlations were made to the improved educational opportunities for girls, which enabled them to stay in school longer, delay marriage and childbirth into adulthood, give them access afterwards to employment opportunities, and to ensure that they were in a better position to make decisions, informed decisions about their life and their health in the future. So Chile gives us a great example of how good maternal health and pro-life laws do not work at cross purposes. It's certainly not the only one. In Europe, we've seen Ireland, Poland, and Malta as countries that have performed very well, not only internationally in general, but also regionally on their maternal health numbers, while at the same time restricting abortion. Of course, Ireland has recently abandoned its strong constitutional protections for the unborn, but it has to be noted that that country achieved not only its success in maternal health, but also extremely increased economic prosperity during the time when that protection was still firmly in place. And so while we can cite several positive country examples to show that legal abortion is neither necessary nor sufficient to achieve good health outcomes for women and girls, we do see the importance of placing high value on women and girls in society and investing in their education and opportunities. In contrast, in places where girls are undervalued and sons are strongly preferred, abortion becomes not a tool for women's advancement, but for their elimination. A recent study just published earlier this month in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that since 1970, over 23 million female births are missing, much of which is due to sex-selective abortion in countries such as China and India. And this problem, it should be said, is exacerbated by policies that emphasize fertility reduction and small family size, the most extreme example of which obviously is China's infamous one-child policy, which creates enormous pressure on women to view their pregnancies as zero-sum, where a daughter can only exist at the expense of a potential son. So apart from just survival, what does it mean for women to flourish in the context of abortion restrictions? Obviously, there's no single agreed definition for what that looks like, and there have been numerous metrics that have been proposed to capture various views of what women's status is or what it ought to be. To some international agencies like UN Women and the International Labor Organization, women's status is often measured in terms of parity with men in the formal workforce across different sectors. And to enable this, they call for radical micromanagement of household work. To quote a report on gender equality released earlier this year from the ILO, redistributing unpaid care work by promoting a more equal division between women and men and between families and society must be a prime objective, and that these measures can be effective especially when mandatory. But when you look at countries where women's workforce participation is already encouraged, such as in Denmark, a 2018 working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that the pay gaps that still persisted between men and women could not be explained by discrimination, but rather were the result of women taking time off from work to raise their children. So when motherhood is seen as incurring a penalty on women, abortion is framed as a necessary defense. As people in this event have spoken about earlier, Roe is presenting abortion as a necessary backstop for when contraception fails. But contraception, in turn, was offered with the promise to uncouple the sexual act from procreation and basically to turn this natural law into an opt-in only. But biology and human nature are stubborn things. The United Nations Population Fund in 2017 published their State of World Population Report with the claim in very large letters that 43% of pregnancies in the developing world were unplanned. They'd neglected to mention in that report that the figure in the developed world was 46%, which was subsequently published in The Lancet in the small print. So for all the wealth and accomplishment of developed countries, the idea of perfect fertility control, absent abstinence, remains an illusion. Many have argued that women in the decades since Roe have structured their lives around the assumption that abortion on demand would be available. And on top of that, economies of wealthiest nations in the world, most of which do have liberal abortion laws, presume that families will have 2 incomes, that births will occur in a predictable fashion and at relatively low numbers, and that care work in the home will be divided in such a way as to optimize women's participation in the formal economy. So to remove the backstop of abortion from the use of imperfect contraceptives by failure-prone humans would require the rethinking of a lot of our assumptions, a rediscovery that children are to be accepted rather than prohibited or demanded, and a recognition that the promise of sex completely independent of procreation was always a lie whose cover-up has amassed a truly horrific body count. So women can absolutely thrive in a post-Roe context, but we cannot ignore the extent to which Western society has proceeded from offering women the opportunity to have it all to leaving them with little alternative. Shifting away from reliance on the abortion backstop will inevitably incur some costs, and women alone cannot be asked to pay for them. Fortunately, the pro-life community in this country has spent the decades since Roe assembling best practices, from offering support and counseling for women facing crisis pregnancies, promoting adoption and foster care to ensure that children have loving homes, and fighting the endless legal battles to protect the status of the most powerless among us. So much of what will be needed going forward, we already know how to do. And in closing, just as we can draw examples from other countries on how to advance the status of women independently from abortion, the United States has the opportunity to be a true leader in the world and set a powerful example for everyone else. Most of the women thriving in countries with strong pro-life laws do so with far fewer resources than women have here in the United States. The current administration is committed to using its foreign aid funding and its influence in negotiations at the UN and other venues to improve women's health and opportunities around the world while opposing attempts to create an internationally recognized right to abortion. So it's time, I think, for the US to practice at home what we preach abroad and to become the definitive example of how women indeed can thrive in the context of pro-life legal protections and policies that support them in the context of stable and thriving families. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm really grateful to be here today. Really grateful to Americans United for Life, not only for having this event, but for inviting me to speak. It's really an honor. We've heard a lot of very different, very interesting information so far today. And I think there's one thing that all that information has in common. It's that we never hear any of it other than places like here. We don't read about these things in the New York Times. We don't see it on cable news. This stuff is hidden. I report on this all the time, and if I want to find out this information, I have to make lists for myself of who these people are and go read their research and whatever else, because it's not given to me in an accessible way. And so that's what I want to talk about today, just how much media misinformation contributes to the landscape that we're looking at. This is the type of information that if people had it, they would become pro-life, or at least more pro-life, or at least see the issue the way that we do. And they don't, because they don't know the issue the way that we do. They just don't know where to look for the information, and the places they go aren't giving it to them. And I think, if you look around at the landscape right now, we're actually at a pivotal moment for the pro-life movement. The Democratic Party is becoming increasingly radical on abortion, even as science and medical technology are making it possible for premature infants to survive earlier and earlier in pregnancy. They're pushing for policies to expand abortion rights later and later in pregnancy. We've seen this all over the place lately. And I think it's very revealing because the left is extremely out of step with the average American on this issue. And yet they continue to get away with it. They continue to be reelected. Planned Parenthood continues to have a high approval rating, whatever else. This is all possible because Americans simply don't realize how radical the left is and how radical the pro-abortion movement is. So if you look at polling, for instance, last summer, Gallup found that only 13% of Americans support abortion during the third trimester. That is a tiny fraction of Americans. And yet we're seeing these policies pushing abortion until birth in the last 3 months of pregnancy. 13% of Americans. By that logic, the other, I'm not good at math off the top of my head, that other percentage should all be showing up and voting for Republicans if they understand what's going on here, but they don't. Marist has found consistently over the last several years, in particular Marist polling, that about 3/4 of Americans support limiting abortion to, at most, the first 3 months of pregnancy. And that includes some fraction who would never legalize abortion and some fraction who would limit it to the hard cases of, the so-called hard cases of rape and incest. 3/4 of Americans, and that includes a majority of Democrats and a majority of Americans who describe themselves as pro-choice rather. And yet this is what, Democrats are pushing policies out of step with those views. I could keep going. A majority support a 20-week ban on abortion, like the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. A majority support heartbeat bills. We just saw that in a poll last month. A majority support, an overwhelming majority support giving care to newborns after delivery. And huge majorities of pro-choice Americans, thanks to a poll commissioned by Americans United for Life. We know that. And yet Democrats are continuing to grow more radical on this issue. In not only New York and Virginia, which we've already talked about, but also Illinois, Vermont, Rhode Island. We're seeing these bills not only to legalize abortion later and later in pregnancy, but to define abortion on demand as a fundamental human right, and to affirmatively dehumanize fetuses, to say that they have no legal rights whatsoever. Again, this is all incredibly out of step with Americans with where they are on abortion, and yet the other side's getting away with this all the time. And so I just want to give sort of a thesis for why I think this is happening, and it's because Americans do not know, and this is not a new phenomenon. If you remember the case against the abortionist Kermit Gosnell outside Philadelphia, who is, butchering infants in his hazardous abortion clinic. Women died in his abortion clinic. He was on trial, in part was found guilty of snipping the spinal columns of babies delivered alive in his clinic with scissors. And yet during his trial, there's pictures of the rows of media seats empty at his trial. There's no one there. Where is everybody? This is horrifying, and it's not covered. Or think about the Center for Medical Progress videos a couple summers ago. The videos showing undercover footage of Planned Parenthood officials agreeing on these contracts to sell the fetal body parts of aborted babies for medical research. What was the coverage of these videos? Either it didn't happen at all, or we read Planned Parenthood's own talking points about the videos being debunked, about them being heavily and selectively edited. In every major publication, these are the lines that we saw, even though multiple forensic analyses found that the videos were not edited in any salient way to what the footage showed. And it's bad now, too. If you look at the example I wanted to focus on today with the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. I don't know how closely you all followed this, but after those really gruesome comments from Governor Ralph Northam in Virginia, the Republicans in the Senate made this effort to push a bill that would have required doctors to provide medical care to any infant born alive after an attempted abortion procedure. So this is not an abortion bill. This is a bill about giving medical care to an infant, supposedly unwanted infant, that was supposed to have died a couple minutes earlier or been killed a couple moments earlier. So this bill was defeated because 44 Democrats showed up on the Senate floor and claimed that this was a bill about women's rights, or that it was violating women's rights, that it's bad for women if we allow this bill to pass, and they claimed that it was about abortion. And when you read about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act in nearly every mainstream outlet, this was framed as an anti-abortion bill. I saw this word, anti-abortion, applied to the Born Alive bill more times than I could count in every major publication, some of them multiple times. It was called an anti-abortion bill. And the bill did not limit abortion in any way. It required medical care for infants. And this was framed not only as anti-abortion, but as conservatives pounce, this very common framing. I have a couple examples here. The New York Times piece about this had the headline, "Trump, Pence lead GOP seizure of abortion as a potent 2020 issue." So not only does that make no grammatical sense, I don't know what GOP seizure of is, this is framed as the Republican Party's being crazy. Washington Post says Trump and Republicans are trying to paint Democrats as radical on abortion. Politico says Republicans pound infanticide message. And also there was another Politico piece, Senate defeats anti-abortion bill as GOP tries to jam Democrats. So there's a twofer. We've got anti-abortion and jamming Democrats. This is not about jamming Democrats. This is not about seizing on an issue. This is about what Democrats are doing. Democrats are saying we don't have to care for infants who are born alive after an attempted abortion. And yet, how is the issue framed? It's framed as Republicans are trying to make Democrats look crazy by talking about this. That's why Americans don't know what's going on. This is how Democrats got away with standing on the Senate floor and claiming that the Born Alive bill was about women's health. And so I don't actually have a solution, but I write about this a lot, and I try to encourage others to write about it fairly and accurately so that people actually get the information that they need. Because I think if the average American knew this stuff, maybe they wouldn't be as pro-life as I am and as probably all of you are, but they would certainly be in that 3/4, maybe are already in that 3/4 of Americans who want to see abortion drastically limited, and they would understand that the other side of this issue is incredibly extreme.
Thank you. Catherine?
I have just been sitting here in awe of these women who have spoken before me. I deeply admire each one of you. Thank you for the invitation. In my comments, I hope to emphasize the speak portion in today's Women Speak event. It is crucial. We as pro-life women do raise our voices, or else the only voices out there will be the lies put forward by the abortion industry. In order to speak up effectively, my first point is this: get educated on the life issue. And to Alexandra's point, it's obvious many of us are not. Call it naivete, ignorance, what have you, but when I first started working on the pro-life issue full-time and started studying the messaging coming from both pro-life groups and pro-abortion groups, I was stunned to see how abortion advocates are blatantly lying to the American people. They are lying specifically to the vulnerable women they claim to help, and they're largely getting away with it. Planned Parenthood's president, Dr. Alina Wendt, was just put on Time's 100 list. Her lies are more than tolerated, they are celebrated in our culture. And you can find examples of these lies very easily. I went to Planned Parenthood Action's Twitter account the other day, started scrolling through. I'm not blocked by them yet. And one tweet stood out that said, in part, "Before abortion was legal and safe, illegal abortions caused at least 1 in 6 pregnancy-related deaths." We know that this is not true. This tweet is a straight-up lie. Not only did NARAL co-founder himself, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, confess they made up these pre-Roe numbers, but the Centers for Disease Control's own statistics prove it's false. It's one of the many lies you will find stumbling upon, scrolling through Planned Parenthood social media, because Planned Parenthood apparently thinks women aren't capable of calling them out on it. It is insulting to our dignity that a group that claims to be for women lies to women. But you can only identify lies when you know the truth. And that's why it is crucial to educate yourself. My fellow pro-lifers, I encourage you, read Alexandra's reporting, read Rebecca's research, read and watch EWTN News's reporting on the pro-life issues, read the actual text of legislation concerning abortion or not concerning abortion, and read through Planned Parenthood's own annual reports. Those numbers will tell you all you need to know about their agenda. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves and to call out the lies, so speak out. My second point is we also have a responsibility to effectively speak the truth to others. I happen to be an advertising major, and Communication 101 is that communication is always 2 ways. It is not just what you say, but it is how the other person receives that message. So what does that mean for us then? For women convicted to speak the truth about life? It means there is no magical turn of phrase that is going to convert a heart and open someone's eyes. You need to speak the truth in a way the specific individual in front of you can receive it. If someone, for example, advocates for abortion using scientific arguments, it's your responsibility to respond with how science actually points to the reality of life in the womb. If someone argues for abortion using social justice arguments, respond with how abortion is the largest human rights violation. And the research that you do, the education that you do, will enable you to do this and reach people where they are at. The show I host airs on EWTN, the Global Catholic Network. It's no secret what my faith is, and I do not want it to be. But I don't lead every segment and every interview arguing against abortion solely from a religious perspective. I know pro-lifers are often immediately dismissed because of their faith, and I don't want to alienate a potential audience if they think I will only speak using faith arguments. So I make sure to offer other intellectual reasons in support of life. But I do want to make this point. We also have to own the religious argument for the pro-life cause. I've been noticing abortion advocates becoming increasingly nefarious. Abortionists claim they are good Christians when they commit abortions on women. Advocates passively allowing abortion because, well, Jesus will forgive us. And so-called faith leaders perpetuating the lie that women need abortion. Using faith to argue for abortion is especially perverse, twisted, and evil. We cannot allow abortion advocates to make any ground using reasons of religion because God is the author of life. He knit me and my mother's womb. He knit you and your mother's womb. And as Sisters of Life's Sister Bethany Madonna reminded me last week, God would never bring a child into existence and into being with the intention of abortion ever. So while we shouldn't always lead on the faith reasoning for our pro-life view, when it does come up, you better own it. My final point about communicating to our culture is this. Do not be afraid of the awkward. It is easy enough for me sitting here to speak boldly on the life issue. It's not as easy when I get into an Uber and the driver asks me what I do. It's that one-on-one that can be difficult with strangers or with loved ones. It's when those what ifs and maybe I shouldn't go there pop into your brain. But our world needs your courage right now. You need to be brave. We will not change the culture if we remain in our silos and echo chambers and stay silent when we come across someone who disagrees with us. Speak out. We can change the culture one by one. I don't think it takes courage for me to sit in the EWTN studio and talk into a camera that doesn't talk back. But I do need to take a dose of my own advice when the abortion issue pops up in casual conversation. Here's some motivation that helps me to peel away some of that intimidation. People's views on abortion are not necessarily black and white, divided 50-50 across our nation, as much as we might think it is. Many people who identify with the pro-choice label do want restrictions on abortion. Think of the statistics that Alexandra shared with us. And there's another poll that caught my eye. There was a Marist poll released in February, which revealed a major increase in Democrats identifying as pro-life. In January, 20% of Democrats self-identified as pro-life. The next month, that percentage jumped up to 34%. Well, what happened in between then? New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Reproductive Health Act into law, and Virginia Governor Ralph Northam made those now infamous comments that sounded like a defense of infanticide. When you bring the extreme abortion agenda into the light, eyes do open. And I say this because you shouldn't think of your conversations as a confrontation, but as an encounter. Don't think of someone as a statistic, but as a human person with a unique set of views and opinions. And when you do speak, be prepared to explain why you are pro-life. And please do not exaggerate something just because it may sound convenient for our cause. We are on the side of truth, after all, and we must fiercely protect the truth. Now, as this event begins to come to its conclusion and we each leave here and walk down our individual paths and encounter different individuals along that path, do your job to speak up because our world needs your voice.
Rebecca, Alexandra, Catherine, thank you all so much for your perspectives. I'd love to just briefly hear from each of you what your recommendations might be for the people in this room, for the people watching the live stream or tracking this later, maybe especially for young people, how they can speak up, whether it's on the international issues, on the international stage, or just with family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, whatever it may be, how to speak up in support of life.
One idea that just comes to me, and I do want to remind everyone has a platform here, and whether that's your dinner table or whether that's your own social media, it doesn't matter how many followers or what have you. Everyone here has a platform. So just think about what's a way that you can use that platform. And maybe it is at the dinner table, maybe it is on social media. And I don't know, I think you can share life-affirming messages without even having to use the pro-life label. If someone is pregnant, if a friend is pregnant, celebrate that, be there for them, and just have your life speak to why it's important to be there and defend and honor the sanctity of life.
Yeah, we learned so much that how we report in the media matters, how we share on social media matters, and I'm thinking of specifically the Werther effect when it comes to suicide, and how journalists are taught the harm of certain kinds of suicide reporting, and how when we share life-affirming stories, that inspires other people to choose life all throughout the spectrum of life. It inspires hope and help and home, going back to the Congresswoman's comments, in those who are in our circles. And so I find that so beautiful that we all have that platform, and we can all use that platform to speak life into our communities and our culture. Either of you?
I would just say two quick things. One is, make sure that you know where to get the good information, because it's hard to find, and we're the people who know where to find it. And not only that, but we can direct other people to the sources where they can actually get accurate information. So it's really important to know that ourselves and know where to point people. And also just more broadly, I think this is a really kind of a daunting fight sometimes, but I like to think about it in terms of one person, one baby. That's always a win. It's not about having a big platform or about, reaching millions of people like Meghan McCain might on The View. Obviously, that's great. But having that one-to-one win, even if you convince one person ever to think about it the way you do, or even to understand why you're pro-life, I think you have to look at that as a huge win.
That's beautiful. We can all make a difference. We can all plant seeds. We don't always see how those seeds turn out and what the end result is, but we can all make a difference within our communities and spheres again, and we have a responsibility to do that.
I guess I have a couple quick things. One I would point out is the importance of recognizing the difference between hope and fear in the narrative. Even people who believe that abortion should be legal, that it should be government funded, they would still never say that it is objectively a great thing, that you should get pregnant so you can have one, right? They will say that it is better than something else that has to be the worst thing, something else that's more scary. And what is that? Motherhood, the potentially having to delay your plans or rearrange your expectations in life. And those are things that we know that there are solutions for, and the pro-life movement in this country has worked so tirelessly to give women narratives of hope. And, certainly in the media as well as in individual counseling. And so just remembering that when a woman is made to believe that it's her or the baby, only one of them gets out of it okay, that's a narrative of despair. But we can provide women with, the hope that there's a positive life for both of them, that the world is not, so limited that can't be. And I guess the one other little thing I would say, I was so pleased to hear the Congresswoman talk about what a wonderful thing it would be to have, 1.6 million more people. And to remember back to when Roe was decided, that was not the message that people were hearing. The population bomb had just been released a few years earlier. Fear that population growth was going to be the end of us all, both nationally and internationally, was a bipartisan concern. There were a lot of hearings about it at the time. And so as we've seen fertility decline in this country and in much of the West, we have more of an impetus to make family-friendly policies, to make women want to have children and to make sure those children are well educated and well cared for. And so we can use that momentum to help push that message of hope today that maybe we didn't have at the time in 1973.
That's true. There is so much hope today. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Please join me in thanking our panelists. story of paternalism. A government stripping away the political agency of thousands of women simply because it claims to know better. I have to say, I love this dissent. It's the one bright spot in that decision. When it comes to the reliance interest, that speculation, which Chief Justice William Rehnquist, in his Casey opinion, termed undeveloped and totally conclusory, came as much as a surprise to the Chief Justice as it did to the many millions of American women who definitively did not order their lives around abortion. As he noted, one cannot be sure to what economic and social developments the opinion is referring. Surely it is dubious, he wrote, to suggest that women have reached their places in society and reliance upon Roe rather than as a result of their determination to obtain higher education and compete with men in the labor market. And so, he wrote, the court failed to put forth any evidence to prove any true reliance. We have heard so many inspiring stories today and so much good news. We learned that there is hope and there is home without legalized abortion on demand, that it's appalling some of the kinds of laws that the abortion industry is fighting, that they will attack, but we are advancing and we are defending them ably. We learned that so much of the testimony on the other side is frankly lame. We learned that for so many women, abortion is truly harmful, but that women are succeeding and thriving despite, not because of, abortion on demand. We learned that it's possible to use our voices in whatever our sphere to speak out in defense of life, in defense of the human rights of the most vulnerable members of our communities, to defend life, to correct poor or misinformed media coverage, and to debunk the myths of abortion advocates. And we learned that at no point in the last 4 decades have we been closer to building a national consensus about the radical overreach of Roe v. Wade and the perils of a culture that allows and celebrates on-demand abortion for any reason. We know that the abortion rate is dropping in America. We know that it is now at the lowest rate it has been since 1972, the year before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion nationwide. And just knowing that figure, it still astounds me. It gives me chills every time I think about it, because how now with legalized abortion nationwide have we come so far that women recognize that we can succeed without abortion, that it's that same rate as in 1972. We know that science is on our side. We know that the law is on our side. In fact, by now, well over half the U.S. states are considered by the abortion industry to be pro-life. That's not the term they use. They actually call it hostile or extremely hostile to abortion. We'll take it. I like those terms too. We know that the American people are on our side, and we even see it in pop culture. In fact, in the animated superhero movie Incredibles 1, the Incredibles movies have so many pro-life themes. I love talking about it. Grab me afterwards, and I'll tell you all about Incredibles and lots of other pop culture movies. And I'm a film buff. But in Incredibles 1, there's this character named Mirage. And she is the right-hand woman of the supervillain until she reforms and begins to help the Incredibles, the good guys. So what inspires her reformation? Well, she is repulsed by the supervillain's disregard for human life, and in particular, for innocent human life. She says, valuing life is not weakness, and disregarding it is not strength. Even in film, increasingly, we are seeing bold stands for life. People who advocate for life, who believe in life, are creating and supporting this life-affirming message, even in our pop culture, even in some of the biggest movies, these blockbuster hits that we see. And then we see these movies that specifically speak to the issue of abortion. We're seeing movies like Unplanned, movies like Gosnell that speak out on the abortion issue and stand for life and say, no, women deserve better. We can do better. Women bring so many unique gifts into the world, including children. And as a nation and in all our communities, we are making progress with healthcare outcomes, with pregnancy discrimination protections, with parental leave. We still have a long way to go. But step by step, we have this vision of equality. And I know that women and advocates all across our nation, all around the world, are coming together and turning justice into reality for us all. in a world that does not assume that women need abortion to succeed, that women need abortion to compete, but instead celebrates all that women have to offer. And when we work together for life, we can build a legal system that is built on respect, on empowerment, on equality, real equality. That's a legal system that we can all live with. We believe in the world where women are enough, where women do not have to choose between our future and our family. Women have proven the Supreme Court wrong time and time again. We can and do achieve success despite and irrespective of legalized abortion. We are closer than we have ever been before to overturning Roe, and together we will prove to the Supreme Court that in our laws, in our health care, and in our families, we don't need Justice Blackmun's choice. We are ready to see life enabled and women empowered. Thank you all for joining us here today. If you're live streaming, this is the end of the presentation. If you're here at Heritage, we have a little bit of lunch waiting for you just through those doors. But thank you for joining us here at Heritage and around the world. We will keep this conversation going. Thank you.